one for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, August 30th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now, feeling about 30. It's 22 degrees in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls. And here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. As university and college students head back to in-person learning, student leaders from several schools are warning sexual violence on campus is a national epidemic. They've put together a 10-point plan of action to address the issue. Here's City News reporter Carl Hansky.
Student groups say the first 8 weeks of school are the most vulnerable time for students. They're moving into residence, many moving away from home for the first time. It's a big transition period. And also, they say, a time when students are at higher risk of sexual assault on campus due to all the parties and so on. And I'll be talking to students about this if I can find any up at this hour. But students from 20 schools have written an action plan to address sexual violence on campus, something they call a national epidemic. One of the recommendations, mandatory sexual violence prevention training for all students. Carl Hansky, City News.
City News time, 9:01. Now your forecast. Here's meteorologist Jill Taylor.
Very unsettled conditions for us today for Ottawa, the Valley, Smiths Falls, with the showers and thunderstorms at times, and that will continue into the evening. Still on the muggy side as well. The high 26 degrees will feel like 35, 17 for the low. Tomorrow, cloudy with showers and a brisk west wind near 24. For today, the high 26.
And right now it feels like 30, but it's 22 degrees in both Ottawa and in Smiths Falls. Police were called to their fourth shooting in 4 days just after 5 yesterday afternoon. One person injured in the shooting on Lorne Avenue, that is just east of Booth. That person has serious but not life-threatening injuries from a gunshot. Now back on Saturday, one person taken to hospital after a shooting at Banff and Ledbury. A half an hour before that, no injuries reported in a shooting at Morissette and Caldwell. Then there was that multiple shooting in the Byward Market just after bars closed. That happened early on Friday morning. A high-level meeting this afternoon at Queen's Park. With the details, here's City News reporter Charlene Close.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be on Premier Doug Ford's turf today. The meeting is behind closed doors, so we won't be able to tell you exactly what was said, but the two will take part in a photo op at 4 o'clock. We might be able to get a couple of hints from that. Ford has been publicly calling on the federal government to give this province more money for health care. It says his own government is under fire for appearing not to be doing enough. Many hospitals in this province are being crushed under the pressure of a nurses shortage. Emergency departments have been closed for hours, even days this summer. Charlene Close, City News.
City News time, 9:03. Provincial government set to move the controversial long-term care bill to the next stage today. The province passed a motion yesterday sending the bill allowing hospital patients awaiting long-term care to be transferred to a home without their consent directly to third reading. It means there's no public hearing, no consideration by committee. Third reading of the bill is set for this afternoon. Once it passes that second reading vote, critics say skipping the public hearing portion is undemocratic. Above all, there was shock, and that's the word people used over and over again when they remember Princess Diana's death in a Paris car crash 25 years ago this week. A royal historian says the British monarchy, having witnessed a sharp decrease in popularity in the aftermath, now look to William and Harry as saviors of the institution. Diana was a woman the world watched grow from a shy teenager nursery school teacher to a glamorous celebrity who comforted AIDS patients and campaigned for landmine removal. She died at the age of 36. I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Good, bad, or complicated.
There's no news in Ottawa and the Valley he won't talk about.
It's the Rob Snow Show on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
So a guy walks into a church. A church that's occupied by a group that's been ordered evicted. And he holds a little counter protest. And he's the one thrown out of the church by the police. I'm just making sure that's where we are with this St. Bridget's standoff. Yeah? Okay, then. Good morning. Welcome to the Rob Snow Show on City News. Very busy program ahead for you this morning. We're here until noon, and thanks again for deciding to spend some of the day today here with us. Coming up, Senator Vern White, former Ottawa police chief, but we're not going to talk too much about convoys and church occupations and embassies and whatnot. Rather, we're going to talk about drug addiction. Drug addiction, the police, the criminal justice system, supervised injection sites, the calls for a safe supply of drugs, the calls for the decriminalization of all hard street drugs. Shaping up to be an election issue. I don't think it's going to be the defining election issue in the municipal election, but I do find more people are talking about it. It's getting some coverage in the local news media. How this city is dealing with the scourge of drug addiction, an opioid crisis, a tainted drug supply. And whenever you get into this topic, there's always a heated debate about whether we're being too permissive, making it too easy to do drugs, that we're enabling or prolonging someone's addiction. It started in this city long ago. We had needle exchange programs, very controversial at the time. Supervised injection sites, same story. Now calls for a clean supply of drugs. Now calls for the decriminalization of street drugs. And some people, they see the misery in the streets. And they wonder if it's working or if it's all just too much. We'll ask the senator to share his thoughts coming right up. Then, from the senator to the professor. Professor Ian Lee, Sprott School of Business at Carleton University, just about ready to go back to school and shape the young minds of the future leaders, the leaders of tomorrow. Doesn't that bring a smile to your face? Or maybe it makes you tremble in fear. Whatever. He always has an opinion, that's for sure. And this week, we're going to talk about energy. Energy production in this country. The energy crisis in Europe. It's not just about Germany. It's about France, too. That's all over the news this morning. Now, that country's leadership in France, warning energy companies in France and, well, just about everyone else in France, that there is a risk that they're going to have to ration energy supplies this winter. Because Putin is turning off the taps. In the UK, in the meantime, the winter's going to be brutal. Just brutal. Because of an energy crisis. The UK papers are running stories this morning. British schools may be forced to close because the schools can't afford their electricity bills, their heating bills. Pubs, David, can you imagine British pubs forced to close because it's too expensive to keep the lights on? I mean, that's the stuff revolutions are made of right there. And then there's Germany. The German Chancellor, Mr. Scholz, was in Canada last week, basically begging Mr. Trudeau for help. Okay, so can you send us some of your natural gas, your LNG? Because you have lots of the stuff, and we could really use some of it. But Mr. Trudeau seemed to... well, the word in the media is question the business case. The business case. But so-called green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen. Okay? This was Mr. Trudeau's pitch. This is where he took the German Chancellor. Okay? What do you think of this, Chancellor? Here's what we have. We can't do much for you on LNG, but listen to this. We have a non-existent wind farm that could someday power what is right now a non-existent factory in a place called Stephenville, Newfoundland. And we'll send that to you. And take that, Vlad. Stick it to the Ruskies. Crazy, right? We'll also talk about a story that's in the Financial Post this morning. This is the hot rumor in political Ottawa right now, is that Trudeau's going to start cutting checks to help people hurt by inflation. They're going to deposit money right into people's bank accounts to help them weather the worst inflation in 30 or 40 years. Government's been slow off the mark on that front. Lots of other governments have done this already. You know, the Ford government, the Legault government, the Moe government in Saskatchewan, the Horgan government in British Columbia, the U.S. government, the government of the state of New York, the government of the state of California. It's a long, long, long list. Every other G7 country except for Canada. The question is any of it wise? Because the case is also being made, the politicians are making it harder for central bankers to bring inflation under control. You know, the Bank of Canada is trying to put out this fire called inflation, and these darn politicians down in the polls, they keep coming along with cans of gasoline. $500 for you and $600 for you. We'll ask the professor about that. Also on the show this morning, my friend on the right side of things, Michael Taube, syndicated columnist, used to work for Stephen Harper as a speechwriter, latest column in the National Post, argued that Jean Charest, not Pierre Poilievre, Jean Charest is the greatest threat to the unity of the conservative movement in this country. Get back into the Chrystia Freeland video as well. And the attempts by some to pin the blame for that kind of behavior on Pierre Poilievre. And the talkback hour is right in the middle of the show between 10 and 11 o'clock at 750-1310. We do it every morning around here. We take a hot issue, pick your brain about it, and kick it around for an hour. This morning, let's get into this one. Defund the police. Defund the police. As you may or may not know, there is a political group in Ottawa. It's called Horizon Ottawa. It's endorsed 11 candidates in the municipal election. Some are calling that a slate. It's a slate of candidates, or a political party, if you will. And Horizon Ottawa, along with a bunch of other groups, want to defund the police, the Ottawa Police Service. Big time. Defund the police. As in no more frontline police. No more frontline police. And as for everyone else who works for the Ottawa Police, 75% of those jobs would disappear. The call is for $224 million to be cut from the $346 million budget of the Ottawa Police Service. That would be a cut of 65%. That's what defund the police would look like in Ottawa. No more frontline police. None. Do you support or oppose defunding the Ottawa Police? Defund the police. If we did that here in Ottawa, would you support that or oppose that? 750-1310. After the 10 o'clock news, a former Ottawa police chief is next on the Rob Snow Show. on City News.
Is a indoor RC facility with 3 different courses, all under one roof. We have bashing, crawling, and racing. And bashing, you can see just right here to my left. It's a dirt track, kind of like a state park, but for RC trucks. Change it up regularly. It's a lot of fun. Kids just love to rip through the dirt, and so do adults. And then right behind me over here is our crawler track. You essentially drive an RC truck, one of these bigger ones, over an obstacle course made out of rocks, wood, and dirt, and other things. We've got some bridges, some rope bridges, all sorts of challenges. Very challenging and addictive, and it's fun to do with kids and parents alike. And then we also have the race course, which is 10,000 square feet and 600 tons of clay.
Wow.
It's great for taking all sorts of cars around, but we also have a racing community of about 30 drivers. They tinker with their cars. It's a really good entry point for kids to learn about electronics and engineering while they try to edge their competition for the thrill of the win.
What a great, Dan, as I said, I can see it becoming, addictive and, people working on their machines constantly to improve them and that sort of thing. So you have different sort of days, right? So let's talk about Wednesday nights, first of all. What's the setup for Wednesday
absolutely.
nights?
Wednesday night, it's about 30 drivers who get together. It's a pretty intense competition. They're really fine-tuning their cars. We also have Friday nights, which are a bit more relaxed. It's a bit less about who's winning and more just a great place for people to get more into the racing hobby. And then Saturdays and Sundays are just kind of a more open family type atmosphere. All 3 courses are there to play on, and it's just a great atmosphere with welcoming community and people who just want to enjoy playing with toys.
Dan, let's talk about the popularity of the sport, because as I said, I can see people immediately falling in love with it, whether you're doing it competitively or just recreationally. Over the years, what sort of popularity have you seen? Have you seen a growth in the popularity of the sport?
Absolutely, especially in the recent years with the pandemic. People have been buying RC cars to play with at home, in their yards, on the street, or in parks. We built this facility because we wanted to have a place that's specifically built for RC cars that families can come to. It's just great for all ages, and you can get into any type of RC driving while you're here. If you just go on our website, you can Google Electrosport RC to find us. You can sign up there for an introductory session. We'll show you around the facility, get you up and going.
He's a pillar of community opinion.
The Rob Snow Show returns
On Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM
And 1310 AM.
Senator Vern White is with us, former Ottawa police chief. Good morning, Senator.
Hey, Rob, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Did you make it down to the island this summer?
I made it down to an island, Prince Edward Island, for Old Home Week. Yes, I did.
Oh, the other island.
Yes,
Okay.
but I bumped into a lot of Cape Bretoners there. So.
Oh, nice.
Yes, I did. What about you? How did you spend your summer?
I was down to Cape Breton a little bit early on, and then I've been in Finland now since about the 12th of July.
You're in Finland right now?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Partying with the Prime Minister.
Not partying with the Prime Minister, but it is the talk of the town.
I bet it is. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Look, you've told me in the past when we've talked about the issues of drug addiction and how law enforcement should be dealing with drug addiction in the core of our city, that you view someone who is addicted to drugs in Ottawa as a victim of crime, not as a criminal. Can you explain that to our listeners, please?
Sure. Look, we're clearly, when we're talking about people who are addicted, they have an illness that they're trying to fight just as much as many other illnesses. And many will say, well, they brought it upon themselves. Well, no more than a smoker does with some cancers, or a drinker does with cirrhosis of the liver, to be fair. So I guess my perspective is that we need to try and help them from a medical health perspective prior to any other discussion. And I think our challenge is, I wrote an article recently called "Why Are Drugs Illegal?" and it talks about, the fact that drugs aren't illegal. It's just some drugs are, right? That we've decided at some point in our society, that certain drugs would be illegal and others would not. So I am concerned about the fact that, and to be fair, I will preempt this with the fact that when I was in Ottawa at the police service, the vast majority of people we engaged with were not charged criminally for simple possession of drugs. They would be charged often for other crimes like thefts and break-and-enters and some of the criminality they were involved in to buy those drugs, but with not a great focus on laying charges when it came to simple possession of drugs. I guess my perspective is we should be focusing on them from a harm perspective and a health perspective. If it's an addiction issue, they still have to be held accountable for any other criminal activity they're involved in. But I don't think we're gaining any ground by treating people with this illness as if they're criminals because they're simply in possession of something that, to be fair, is harming themselves. And we have not one inch of that ground. And if we had, we would see prices going up. We would see demand going down and the ability or opportunity to purchase being reduced. And in fact, the opposite is true.
Okay. Would you say right now we have here in Ottawa a de facto decriminalized the possession of hard street drugs?
I think across Canada we have.
Across Canada, yeah.
Okay. Probably would say the same.
For how long has that really?
More than a decade, because I've been out of policing a decade, and it was, certainly I remember walking downtown with John Gibbons or Mike Flanagan and others, and people using drugs, and we might take it from them, and we often would not, but we weren't laying charges against people for using. So I don't think that we've really, in the large cities in Canada anyway, I don't think simple possession has been a target of criminal charges. In fact, you were more likely to get a ticket for drinking a beer in the park than you were smoking a joint.
And that's for all drugs, not just cannabis, but for all hard street drugs.
It didn't matter. No, you see people, smoking crack cocaine or injecting on the streets. The reality for, I think, most police agencies has been that other criminality they might be involved in is a different story, but the specific use has not been the target of criminal charges.
What do you say to people? They're around Murray and King Edward, or up into the Byward Market, or parts of Lower Town, Sandy Hill, and they're worried about what they see, the paraphernalia, the open drug use, open drug dealing, feeling unsafe.
Well,
what do you say? What do you do about that?
Well, I think that is where their unsafe part is not from seeing somebody using a drug. The unsafe part is from the criminal behavior they might be involved in to gain the assets to buy the drug. And, I remember meeting in Vanier in a community meeting one time, and, the community members, they really weren't focused on the fact that somebody was using a drug. It was the fact that everything they had was being stolen off their front deck, from their patio, from their backyard, to satisfy people who needed to get $80, $100, $120, $150 a day to buy drugs off the streets to stay high. So that's the feeling unsafe part for the most part. I think, I look at Dr. Jeff Turnbull and the program he's using. If you haven't spoken to him, Rob, I would recommend you do.
Yeah, we're trying to get in touch with him. Yeah.
But by the way, International Drug Overdose Day is tomorrow, right? And,
yes.
We're averaging 22 dead bodies a day right now in this country, so we should be concerned about that as well.
Yeah.
But I think Jeff Turnbull's safe supply program is having a tremendous impact on the opioid addiction in the city of Ottawa. I think he's, with long-term hard work and negotiating with people who are addicts to find a better place for them to land, has been having a positive impact, because I think that's probably where we're going to end up anyway. And I wish governments would realize that that's where we're going to end up and try and assist. Even the Canadian Association Chiefs of Police and the Canadian Police Association have come out in support of safe supply programs.
Yeah.
So,
and you're in favor of a clean supply, a clean drug supply.
I'm in favor of us registering addicts and providing them with a drug as we try to help them move from where they are to a better place. And I don't see any other pathway to get there.
Okay.
The war on drugs when it comes to use is not working, hasn't worked. The key performance indicators, the KPIs around charging, arresting, charging, convicting, and sentencing people to jail has been a failure. I think we need to focus on drug trafficking, absolutely, and focus on people who commit crimes to buy illicit drugs. But let's also focus on people who are addicts and try and help them get to a better place.
Okay. The tough love person in me wants to say, well, first you started with clean needles because you wanted to prevent the spread of disease. Then you wanted a safe place so people wouldn't overdose. Now you want to register drug addicts and give them the drugs, and there be no criminal punishment if they're caught with illegal drugs because they would be decriminalized. And it's all too permissive, Senator. What do you say? It's too permissive. We're making it easy. We're enabling it. We're prolonging people's misery here.
Look, I spent 3 decades thinking what you just spewed, to be honest.
Okay.
And it didn't work. It didn't work.
Yeah.
No, and to be fair now, for over a decade, I would argue that we're not charging these people with possession. Instead, all we're doing is watching them on the streets, committing crimes to get enough money to buy drugs that all too often could kill them as a result. And we're looking at some of the counterfeit fentanyl products. So it didn't work. And I'm not suggesting we legalize drugs. In fact, I don't support us legalizing drugs in any way. I think we probably are facing an onslaught of problems as a result of cannabis legalization, although I didn't fight against that at the end because I felt that they had a pathway. I don't think the governments have figured out that pathway very well. But I think when it comes to the other drugs, us criminalizing people who have addictions has not been successful. And by the way, we're selective about which addictions we talk about. You can be addicted to alcohol, you can be addicted to tobacco, you can be addicted now to cannabis, and you won't have to worry about any criminal charges. But if you're addicted to fentanyl, or if you're addicted to an opioid or a narcotic that you may have started using as a result of a prescribed use, then we're going to criminalize you. How does that make sense to us?
Okay. Well, Senator White, enjoy your trip and your travels in Finland. That sounds very interesting. And safe travels back to Ottawa, sir. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
Bye-bye. Senator Vern White, the former Ottawa police chief, the professor. After the news, Professor Ian Lee from Carleton University. This is the Rob Snow Show on City News.
on for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, August 30th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now, feeling in the low 30s in Ottawa, 23 degrees, Smiths Falls, 24. Here's what's making news this hour. The Premier expected to press the Prime Minister today on several issues and possibly top of the agenda as Doug Ford hosts Justin Trudeau at Queen's Park. Healthcare. Ford and other premiers have been pushing for an increase in federal funding to healthcare to help deal with staffing shortages and the call for some to receive significant raises in the wake of rising inflation and a cap on those wage increases over the past 3 years. Critics say a provincial move is undemocratic. The bill, which would enable some people in hospital to be moved to long-term care homes that may not be of their choosing, will move to third reading after it passes the second reading today. No public hearings and no committee examination. Police have taken the families of 6 young people killed in that weekend crash in Barrie to the accident scene. The accident happened overnight Saturday on a road that had been closed for construction since spring. Family members stood at the side of a large concrete pit in that zone and could be seen throwing flowers into it. Leeds OPP detachment trying to find a missing 31-year-old man. Joel Nauman was last seen on August 29th near Dr. John's Lane in Rideau Lakes. Anyone who has any information about Joel is asked to contact the OPP. City News Time, 9:32. I'm Andrew Boyle. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
He's the opinionated Ottawa icon.
The Rob Snow Show returns
On Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
And he is Associate Professor of Management, Carleton University. Professor Ian Lee is with us every week on the Rob Snow Show. Again in Cardinal, Ontario. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob. And just to correct so any of your listeners don't think I've just been holidaying, computers work in Cardinal. There is the internet in Cardinal, just like there is in my house in Ottawa where I work from home. And there's no difference. My computer travels with me wherever I go, and my computer is an extension of my brain because it has everything in there, all my syllabuses and syllabi and papers and all my data and all my phenomenal graphs and charts of data from StatsCan. So my office is wherever my body is parked and wherever I'm connected to the internet, whether I'm in Cardinal or Ottawa.
Okay. Hey, you went on that tour of the Kingston Penitentiary last week. We caught up to you as you were just driving into Kingston. How did you enjoy that?
I really did enjoy it, and I made a mistake, a factual mistake. I said it was Parks Canada. It's Parks Ontario. So our Ontario taxpayer dollars at work. Right. And it is the oldest, I believe it's the oldest. It was built in 1835. We got the full tour. And it just shows you how things have changed because the original cells back then were little cages. I mean, cages like an animal. Yeah. And that was the modus, of the philosophy, I should say, back in the 1830s. And it changed over the years, but they showed us all the parts, including the isolation where they put the most, dangerous prisoners, and they showed us the area where they made things, the Corcan where they made, where the prisoners were taught skills, to work, to build things, and it was fascinating because I truly meant it when I said I'm not trying to sound, goody two shoes, but I'd never been in a holding cell or a pen or a prison or a detention center in my life. Yeah. I've never been charged. I've never been taken by the police anywhere. So, and so it was news to me, and just fascinating to see because this is really serious stuff. Sure. This is under the Criminal Code of Canada, and of course the Correctional Service of Canada, which ran the prison when it was on an operational penitentiary, are established by an act of Parliament, and this is where we incarcerate people against their will. So, I just could not imagine being in prison.
Would you recommend it to other people, the tour?
I do, because a shout out to the Parks Ontario. They hired retired Correctional Service of Canada guards who had actually worked and served in the Kingston Penitentiary when it was open.
Right.
These were obviously older individuals in their 60s, somewhere in their 70s, but they were just a wealth of personal stories and reflections.
I bet.
They were very careful not to, violate the Privacy Act, which apparently extends to people convicted. Reasons I don't quite understand, but that's okay. Not for me to determine this. And they told one of the individuals there gave an extraordinary account of the famous Kingston riot of 1971. This was in the Pierre Trudeau administration when Jean-Pierre Goyer, for those older people who remember names, was the minister responsible, and really did just messed it up really badly. And it was terrible what happened, and there were deaths, and they wrecked the prison. And but he went into the explanations of how society outside was changing, and the Vietnam War and the protests, and us young boomers, and yet inside the prison they weren't allowed to wear mustaches or sideburns or long hair. It was very, very, very regimented and very strict and draconian. And outside, of course, it was getting more and more liberal all the time. And,
right.
So it was fascinating. It was really, I do recommend it to anybody.
What do they charge you for that? Do you remember?
I think it was $25, $30 a person per adult.
All right.
But it was about an hour and a half, 2 hours. It was almost 2 hours.
Almost 2 hours, okay.
And
good.
Very informative. They really, really did it very, very well, explaining, and the changes over time and the renovations and so forth. So anyone interested in that, it's worth going to.
Okay.
And Kingston's a lovely city, by the way.
So the Telegraph, let's move on here.
Yes.
The energy crisis in Europe is not just a story about Germany. The Telegraph reports today that Putin has slashed gas flows to France, and you have the Prime Minister of France, Elizabeth Borne, urging companies to draft energy savings plans.
Yeah.
Or they could have to ration the supply of natural gas and electricity. In the UK, imagine this. I don't know what your energy bill is in a year, but can you imagine if it was $5,400 a year?
Exactly.
It's great. That's a lot of money. That's
Rob, there's two really important things here. People, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, sad, very sad, but hey, that's Europe, that's not us, and nothing to do with us.
No,
that's not true, and I want to explain why.
Okay.
Historically, the gas market, and I mean natural gas, I'm not talking gasoline.
Yeah, natural gas.
Regional, because it was very difficult to transport natural gas historically. I'm talking over the last 100 years or more. And whereas the oil markets were always global, a global price called West Texas Intermediate, which is a classification of oil, or Brent, and there's others, okay? But it was a global market with a global price. We all know that. The price is quoted around the world. Gas was regional. There was a regional price set in Europe for gas, which was separate from the North American price, separate from the Asian price. In North America, it's called Henry Hub, which just happens to be a little podunk town in Oklahoma where they settle the price and determine the price daily in a spot market. Okay, let's fast forward to the present. What's happened in the last few years is Europe became, and other countries needed more and more natural gas. They built more and more LNG terminals and LNG tankers, which they had the effect of transforming, at least partially, a regional market into a global market. You can say, well, so what? Who cares? Well, it means that before we had the lowest energy prices in the world, in Canada and the U.S., especially natural gas, because we've got, I think it's 200 years of supply. Somebody at NRC, Natural Resource Canada, may correct me, but we have enormous years of supply of natural gas, and prices were very low. What's happening as we speak right now, August 2022, is that the U.S., because they're far more entrepreneurial and dynamic than the government of Canada, and private companies are pumping natural gas, liquefying it, and shipping it like crazy to Europe because of this desperate shortage and this looming.
But they must also, at the state and federal level, have more accommodative regulatory process.
So what's happening, though, it's called supply and demand, and that rising demand is raising the prices of natural gas here because it is a market price, just like oil is a market price. So we may say, hey, Europe has nothing to do with us, but it is going to have indirect impact on us, just as it did on the oil prices, as we've experienced over the last 6, 8, 9 months with Putin's illegal, horrible invasion of Ukraine. So that's the first point, is we can't sit here and say, well, yeah, sad, very sad, but it doesn't really affect us. Yes, it does affect us. And so that's something to consider. The second point is, if there are, and I believe there will be, some really serious deprivation and suffering in Europe this winter, because they normally rebuild their storage of natural gas in the summer months, because you use a lot less in the summer and use a lot more in the winter, principally for heating, and their storage tanks are way down. And everyone agrees there's going to be massive shortages this winter across Europe. And if there are stories of deprivation, I mean people's pipes freezing, and they're freezing in the dark. I don't know if Mr. Trudeau's very casual dismissal of shipping LNG will be sustainable. To use a lovely word he can understand, sustainability. I don't think it's politically sustainable if there's people dying in Europe. And his argument is, it's going to take a long time to ship them. That's actually not true. If people do their research on this, you'll find that the Europeans have become very innovative, because normally to build an LNG terminal takes several years. Well, they're taking tankers, that float in the water. We call them ships, and they're turning them into floating LNG terminals, and they can put one up in less than 12 months. And it's a very fast-track way of dealing with the shortage of LNG. So when Mr. Trudeau says, we can't get it there for years anyways, he is factually incorrect.
Okay. Let me ask you this. It was suggested in the last week or so in the National Post that at current prices, just one Canadian port exporting liquid natural gas could add 9 figures to the Canadian GDP each day. Does that sound accurate to you?
I didn't look up that data. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, the demand for natural gas has gone through the roof. The price in Europe has gone through the roof. It's still not a global price. The European price for natural gas is way higher. We have plentiful supplies, whether it's 200 years or 500 years or 300 years. I'm not going to quibble.
Right.
So we have massive, gargantuan amounts. Second point, it is the cleanest of all the fossil fuels. It is vastly cleaner than the filthy, dirty coal that is many in Europe are reverting to. By the way, story yesterday, I think it was the Telegraph or Financial Times, people are lining up across Poland to buy coal for this winter to heat their homes. So when we cavalierly...
Like my father's house. It's like the house my father grew up in. Had a coal stove.
Listen, very quickly. When we shut down, as environmentalists have demanded, shut down oil, shut down gas, and we're doing it here in Canada by refusing to replace obsolete old pipelines. The Ontario Energy Board is turning down a request to replace existing pipelines that are at the end of their life cycle. And so their argument is, we'll force people to switch from oil and gas by simply restricting the supply very deliberately. Social engineering. And what we're learning is, what are these countries doing? They're turning to wood and to coal. In other words, that's why I keep saying one of the biggest threats to the environment are environmentalists who are opposed to gas as the bridge fuel to the future, which Elon Musk today argued is going to save us. It's not an enemy, and we should be looking at it from that point of view. In other words, Germany, for example, is using 22% coal. We should be shipping natural gas to help the Germans clean.
What I want to get at is there a business case? As widely circulated over the last week or so, Trudeau says there's no business case for it because the natural gas is primarily located in the gas fields of Alberta and British Columbia. So you have to get it to somewhere in Atlantic Canada, you would think, in order to get it off to ports in Europe.
Rob, when he said that, I just about blew a blood vessel or something, or gasket.
All right.
I mean, because, so everybody understands, he's picked up this buzzword, a business case. It's not actually a buzzword. It has real meaning in the business world of finance.
Sure.
The company that has, you're Tim Hortons, you want to open up a new franchise in downtown Ottawa or Halifax or somewhere. Yeah. So you go to your vice president and make the business case, or you go to the bankers who are going to provide the capital, or you go to a venture capitalist, or you go to the shareholders. Okay, this is standard operating practice in the corporate world. Mr. Trudeau has adopted this buzzword, implying that it's up to the Prime Minister and the government and the PMO to make approvals of companies concerning their risk of making a new investment in a new business or an existing business. It is simply in a decentralized market economy, which Canada, U.S., Europe has, South Korea, Japan, it is not the role of the Prime Minister or the President to make decisions about the riskiness of a particular capital investment. If the shareholders of Enbridge or whomever want to decide to try and build a pipeline and put billions into it, that is their choice. It is not the Prime Minister's job to make these decisions on the business case and the risk involved of a particular investment. I want to quote one of the great leaders of the late 20th century and this century. His name is Bill Belichick, the coach of the New England Patriots. He's got two great lines. Number one, stay in your lane. Two, just do your job. And that's really good advice for the Prime Minister. He is way out of his lane in suggesting it's his job to determine if there is a business case. No, it is not. His job is to make sure the policy environment or framework is robust and is going to encourage businesses to make investments. It's up to the shareholders and the managers and the CEOs and the executives to determine if the business case makes sense. Okay. He is not a businessman. He is the Prime Minister running the government, and his job is to focus on government public policy, not private capital business case investment decisions.
Okay. When we come back, is he making the governor of the Bank of Canada's job more difficult? This is the Rob Snow Show. We're here with Professor Ian Lee, and this is City News.
Whispers in the wind, slowly blowing by. Stories being told without even knowing mine. Picture all of it going through my mind. People being bold and they stepping out of line. Now think about the lies, think about the kind of people who deny, then try to undermine. Gossip when they can, try to damage lives. Problems where I stand, but I'm never gonna hide. No, they ain't never been through all of this. Seeing you succeed, but try to ruin your biz. Try to bruise all of it, so you lose all of it. Deception and destruction to confuse all of it. Chitter chat, hear the chitter chat. Haters ain't about it, and they only chitter chat. Chitter chat, chitter chat. Hear the chitter chat. Cowards talk the loudest, and they only chitter chat. Chitter chat, chitter chat. Hear the chitter chat. Haters ain't about it, and they only chitter chat. Chitter chat, chitter chat. Hear the chitter chat. Cowards talk the loudest, and they only chitter chat. First they talking quiet, now they talking loud. Before they gave me dabs, now they never come around. Still they walking silent, hiding with the crowd. See the hater chat, yet they never hold it down. Slandering my name, trying to bring a shame. The truth will set you free, so forget about the games. Time to get it out the way, save my energy today. Brush that dirt up off the shoulder, walk away from the hate. Nah, no, they ain't never been through all of this. Seeing you succeed, but try to ruin your biz. Try to bruise all of it, so you lose all of it. Deception and destruction to confuse all of it. Chitter chat, hear the chitter chat. Haters ain't about it, and they only chitter chat. Chitter chat, chitter chat. Hear the chitter chat. Cowards talk the loudest, and they only chitter chat. Chitter chat, chitter chat. Hear the chitter chat. Haters ain't about it and they only chitter chat, chitter chat, chitter chat. Hear the chitter chat. Cowards talk the loudest and they only chitter chat, chitter chat, chitter chat. Hear the 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 chitter chat.
Strong voice.
Strong opinions.
Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Back with Professor Ian Lee from Carleton University's Sprott School of Business. According to the Financial Post, Prime Minister Trudeau is under growing pressure to help Canadian households, quote, offset surging inflation as he meets with his cabinet in Vancouver next week to set his government's fall agenda. Unlike many of his global peers, Trudeau has avoided taking new measures recently to ease the burden of rising prices, even with inflation at its highest level since the early 80s. That may reflect a growing political sensitivity to criticism his government overspent during the pandemic, leaving the country with less fiscal room to tackle big future challenges like climate change. But there is also a wariness that doling out money to ease price pain may only wind up stoking more inflation. Staying on the sidelines, however, has become increasingly difficult. So the rumor is the Trudeau government's going to cave, and it's going to be pumping money into the bank accounts of Canadians soon enough because of the poll numbers, plain and simple. But how wise is that?
First and foremost, I really object to that word cave. I think, cave. I believe, I can't prove it. Okay. I'm not quoting data now, but I believe that the Liberal government has planted a leak.
A leak, yeah. That this is a leak, yeah.
Conservative governments did it too, and NDP governments did. They've deliberately planted a leak, because they're floating a trial balloon, because they want to go down that road. And so they're preparing the public by leaking this and saying, gosh darn, we're being forced to do it. They're not being forced.
Dragged, kicking and screaming.
Kicking and screaming. Yeah. They want to do it. This government has shown a remarkable capacity to spend money. In fact, he ran in 2015 saying, I'm going to run up deficits for the first time.
We'll borrow the money so you don't have to.
Yeah, and he believes in that. So I think that's where they're going. Now, to your question, is this a wise idea? I mean, I just can't think of anything more moronic. Because, well, let's be clear. I mean, what he's doing is validating once again someone vastly more learned and scholarly and knowledgeable about this. And I'm talking about the late Professor Milton Friedman of the University of Chicago, who did win a Nobel Prize in economics. I certainly didn't ever win one, never will, and neither did Mr. Trudeau. So maybe we should listen to him. He did a massive amount of research over his lifetime on this and showed that governments everywhere, he wasn't picking on the American government. My God, he went back to ancient Roman times and all the way down to the present.
Don't get me started about the Romans. Okay, go ahead.
What he argued was that everywhere governments create and drive inflation. And they do it partly to run up, to pay off their debts with cheaper money. Because you run up big debts and then you inflate the money supply and you create inflation, so you're paying back the debt with cheaper money.
You're devaluing the currency.
You're devaluing the currency, exactly. And so what I'm saying in this instance, what they are proposing to do, if they are going to do if they proceed, is they're going to pump yet more stimulus into the system. And in my words, the phrase I want to use is what they're going to do is stimulate the inflation. Now, I don't think when you put it that baldly and crassly, I don't think there's any reasonable person who thinks it's a good idea to stimulate inflation. We want to do the opposite, and in fact, he will be undermining the governor of the Bank of Canada.
Like when you listen to, for example, if you listen to Jerome Powell, he's the U.S. Fed chair. If you listen to Tiff Macklem, the governor of the Bank of Canada, they keep saying over and over and over again, there's too much demand in the economy. There's too much demand in the economy.
Right.
And what these interest rate hikes are designed to do is to, destroy demand in the economy.
Cool it down. I would like to use the word.
Well, no, they call it demand destruction. They're trying to perpetrate demand destruction.
Yeah.
And what the government could be doing with a policy like this, just as Legault is doing with his $600 and Ford is doing with his, rebates on vehicle permits and everything else, and Scott Moe is doing with his $500 out in Saskatchewan, they're running counter to the goals of the Bank of Canada.
That's exactly my point.
Yeah.
And let me go further, everybody. I'm not just criticizing Trudeau.
Yeah.
I'm criticizing conservative governments that do this too.
Yeah.
It is just a dumb idea because what you're doing is pouring more stimulus into the system to increase aggregate demand. The bank has very clearly said, the Central Bank of Canada, appointed by Mr. Trudeau, by the way, I'm talking about Tiff Macklem, and Jerome Powell for the Federal Reserve, said we want to cool the economy. So if you pour yet more stimulus into the economy to rev it up even more, this is going to cause
You're just prolonging the problem, right?
You're going to drive the interest rates even higher.
We have 2 minutes left, and I want to ask you because your first day back is when to school?
Wednesday.
Tuesday?
Next Wednesday morning.
Wednesday, okay.
I'm in class at 8:30, and I teach them. Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
So for someone like you, experienced professor, there are all those years at Carleton University. I mean, how many days a week do you actually have to
Listen, I teach 3 days a week.
3 days a week? Oh, my gosh.
Hang on, I'm not finished. I do all my own grading. I do not use TAs or RAs or any A's to do any grading because I teach fourth-year classes. So I do 100% of my grading, and I become a grading machine. And the students appreciate it.
What are you teaching?
I'm at the university in the class.
No, but what are you teaching?
The capstone course, fourth-year capstone course, the strategy capstone course. So I only ever teach fourth-year students who are graduating in 3 months or 6 months. They're just going out the door. They're typically 22, 23 years old. And the way I like to put it, and this may offend some people, but students come in at the age of 18 from high schools, and they know nothing about anything in the world. 4 years later, they graduate as mature, sophisticated young men and women who are remarkable. I mean, the transformation in that 4 years from 18 to 22 in the university is stunning.
I want to get into something. What are the COVID rules? Are you going to be teaching actually in the class?
I'm going to be teaching in the class.
Do you have to wear a mask?
A mask.
Do you have to wear a mask?
No. The university, Carleton just announced, and I applaud Carleton University, just announced they're not requiring mandatory masks. They encourage them, but they don't require them. And they're encouraging vaccination, but they do not require it.
What do you think about what they did at Western?
I think they're completely wrong. And some people with long memories may say, what are you talking about, Ian Lee? 2 years ago, you were supporting this. Yes, I was. 2 years ago, the vaccination rate in Canada was 0. 0 means none. Today, I just looked it up before I came on your show. 85% of Canadians have at least one vaccination shot. And I have 5, by the way. 5.
Wow.
All 5 fingers, Wow. And because I believe in vaccines. They work, just like polio vaccine works, and hepatitis A and B vaccine
works. So at Western, you have to have at least one booster, and you have to wear a mask. And you think...
And I'll tell you why I'm opposed to it. You can say, well, what's wrong with that? It is virtue signaling. If we are going to do that, it's got to be uniform across the country so that every last institution, retail stores, trains, buses, everything does it. If you only have 1 or 2 institutions in the whole society that say you have to wear a mask, then it's utterly meaningless and useless. Okay, so this is why I'm so opposed to the airport policy. You walk over the airport where you have to wear the mask, and you get into a taxi and you don't have to wear a mask. You go downtown to the office, you don't have to wear a mask. You walk down the street, you don't have to wear a mask. You walk into an office building. So if it isn't, and I'm not advocating it be mandatory, by the way, but I'm because I think the crisis is over and we have very high rates of vaccination. That's why. But my point is, very quickly, quickly, Rob.
Yep.
If you're not imposing it on everybody across the whole society, then it is utterly empty and meaningless to just do it in one place called an airport or a university. They're virtue signaling, and I think it's offensive, and I think it's silly, and I will not be wearing a mask in the classroom because I walk my own talk, and I've had 5 vaccinations, and in the fall when they come up with whatever it's called, the Omicron, I'm going to be going for number 6.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the time.
Okay, Rob.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Yep.
Bye.
Professor Ian Lee, Carleton University. Talk back hour next. Defund the police. You support or oppose defunding the Ottawa Police? 750-1310 rapid poll right after the news on City News.
Being a crossing guard works great as part of my schedule as a high school student because I still have time to do my tests and assignments while earning a little bit of cash on the side.
Working as a crossing guard fits into my current lifestyle because it gives me a lot of time during the day to pursue hobbies that I'm very interested in.
A friend of mine introduced me to this job. I didn't know it was actually a paid job.
I always start my day. It's a very little, I guess, few months baby, and she always comes with her dad on a pram, and the smile she has, like, oh my God.
Well, I think the OSC is a very good employer. They show quite clearly that they care about you. They're very polite.
They really make you feel like you're part of a family.
It's fun. I really enjoy it.
Gets us out of the house, too.
Yeah.
Number 1 for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, August 30th. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now in Ottawa, 23, 24 in Smiths Falls, and here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. Ontario's Premier welcomes the Prime Minister to Queen's Park this afternoon. City News reporter Charlene Close with a preview.
A no media allowed meeting between Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau in Ford's office today. The two political heavyweights are planning a photo op at 4 o'clock this afternoon. They may then answer a few quick reporter questions about the session. It's usually a tame, polite exchange between the two. Ford has been calling for more federal cash to help Ontario's struggling healthcare system. He's been taking a lot of heat himself for the situation. Many doctors and nurses are calling it a crisis, but his government is avoiding using that word. Many hospitals across the province have temporarily closed their ERs or ICUs on and off over the summer because they just don't have enough nurses. Charlene Close, City News.
Now, the Ontario government is also set to move its controversial long-term care bill to the next stage, and that will happen today. Now, the province passed a motion yesterday that sends the bill that would allow hospital patients awaiting long-term care placement to be transferred to a home without their consent. Now, that bill goes directly to third reading. It means no public hearings or consideration by a legislature committee. Critics say skipping the public hearing is undemocratic. City News Time, 10:04. Now your forecast. Here's meteorologist Jill Taylor.
Very unsettled conditions for us today for Ottawa, the Valley, Smiths Falls, with the showers and thunderstorms at times, and that will continue into the evening. Still on the muggy side as well. The high 26 degrees will feel like 35, 17 for the low. Tomorrow, cloudy with showers and a brisk west wind near 24. For today, the high 26.
And it does feel in the low 30s right now. It's 23 degrees in Ottawa, 24 in Smiths Falls. OPP is asking you to keep an eye out for a missing 31-year-old man. Joel Newman was last seen yesterday near Dr. John's Lane. That's in Rideau Lakes. Joel is 6'4", weighs 180 pounds with short brown hair and is clean shaven. Last seen, he was wearing jeans and a black T-shirt. Anyone with any information is asked to contact the Leeds OPP. Hockey Canada's board of directors supporting the president and the CEO, Scott Smith, and his executive, despite calls for a leadership change.
Canada's governing body of hockey is under intense scrutiny for its handling of sexual assault allegations against members of previous men's junior teams. The federal government froze Hockey Canada's funding after it was revealed the organization had quietly settled a lawsuit with a woman who alleged she was sexually assaulted by members of the 2018 men's junior team at a gala in London, Ontario. Since then, Hockey Canada has said members of the 2003 junior team are being investigated for an alleged sexual assault in Nova Scotia. Don Kelly, The Canadian Press.
City News Time, 10:05. I'm Andrew Boyle. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
It's time to talk back
on the Rob Snow Show.
Have your say and call now.
613-750-1310.
Why don't I do a rapid poll on defunding the police? Defund the police. Do you support or oppose defunding the Ottawa police? Defund the police. If we did that here in Ottawa, would you support that or would you oppose that? 750-1310, 750-1310, 613-750-1310. I kind of want to come at this rapid poll style, and I'm going to be keeping track of your answers in my little notepad here. Okay? And we'll see where we are by the end of the hour. So I'm going to be keeping score. And the rapid poll question is just kind of a conversation starter. It's an appetizer for the conversation, if you will, an amuse-bouche. And I hope it leads to a broader discussion about how you think the Ottawa Police Service could better serve the residents of Ottawa. But again, that poll question, defund the police. Defund the police. If we did that here in Ottawa, would you support that or would you oppose that? And our call-in line is 750-1310, 750-1310. And then that follow-up question, how could the Ottawa Police Service better serve the residents of Ottawa? I want to bring this up because it's a municipal election year. We have, 54 days to go or something like that until the municipal election. And there are a lot of candidates running in the election, and they want to defund the police. And they want to come at policing a whole new way. And Ottawa would not be the first city to try this. Other cities have tried to do this. And from what I've read, and I've read quite a bit about it, in cities where it's been tried, it has not been a great success. Some cities where they tried it, they've totally reversed course. And they actually ended up increasing their police budgets because what they experienced was a spike in crime after defunding the police. This phrase, defund the police, as I understand it, has actually been around for a long, long time. You can go back to the civil rights movement in the United States, but it really gained momentum after the murder of George Floyd by police officers in Minneapolis. And that's when I first heard it, after that story hit the news. And it's going to be an issue in the municipal election campaign here in Ottawa, defund the police. That's why I want to ask you about it. There are candidates in the municipal election asking for your vote They want to dramatically cut the funding for the Ottawa police. Big time. And then you pour, this is kind of the rationale, you defund the police. And you take whatever savings are achieved from defunding the police and you invest it in social programs. Community outreach programs, mental health, affordable housing, supportive housing, addiction treatment programs, which, hey, sounds great. If it works. And that's the key question. 750-1310, 750-1310. Defund the police. Let's go here. Okay. Odin in Ottawa. Good morning, Odin.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Glad to hear it. Do you support or oppose defunding the police?
I oppose, and I am the last person in the world to ever say that I like police. I trust the police.
Okay.
But the thing is, the problem is not to defund the police. It's make the police accountable for the things that they do. Police are allowed to lie. Police get away with a lot of things. If they were held accountable, there would be a lot less issues with police.
So for my follow-up question, how could the Ottawa Police Service better serve the residents of Ottawa? You would say improve accountability.
Absolutely. Because
interesting.
The thing
okay.
is, you can take police off the streets and it may look good, but the thing is it's really just going to shoot you in the foot in the long run.
Okay.
Police are accountable for the stupid things that they do and the ridiculous things that they do, then maybe we'd have a better police force. If you have 100 police and you have 10 crooked cops, you still got 100 bad cops at that point.
Okay. Thank you, Odin. Thank you for your call, sir. I appreciate it. And that's the way we roll on the Talkback Hour. Mike in Orleans. Mike, you're on City News. Mike, good morning. Mike in Orleans? Nope, we've lost Mike. Okay, let's just move on to line 3. Ali in Ottawa. Ali.
Hi.
Hi, Ali. On defund the Well, I appreciate you, sir, taking the time. It's greatly appreciated. On defund the police, if we did that here in Ottawa, would you support that or oppose that?
I will do neither of them because supporting them or defunding them is not even the issue. And I'm a colored person. I'm a black, and our issue in the community is not their budget and what they do with their money.
Okay.
Every company, every organization, everything has their own budget of running their operations. Mm-hmm. So that is not it will not help our situation in the community. There will be less cops in the community, and it will also be the ones that's there. They're like, these people want to defund us. Why do we even go extra mile to work for them? And most of your previous caller says what I wanted to say is accountability that matters, because when they do something, half of the things we don't even know.
Right.
Just keep it under wraps, and half of the stuff that comes out, like sexual assault and stuff like that, it takes months and years to even do anything about it, if they do anything. They just let someone just go on leave. They couldn't even fire him. They couldn't even come out and say, we fired this person out of the department. They couldn't even say that. It was just weird what they do when one does something.
Okay. So when I ask this follow-up question, how could the Ottawa Police Service better serve the residents? Like the previous caller, better accountability, more accountability.
More accountability. What are they doing? Every time I see them, some of them are just at a parking lot just having conversations. Some of them, I'm a truck driver. Sometimes I see an ambulance worker and a cop just talking to each other at a McDonald's parking lot. I see them a lot just hanging out and chilling. And I don't think the budget is the problem. Because if you take them, there's a lot of money the government has that they can give it to other places if they wanted to. So taking something away from the cops is not an issue. That's not even a good way of fixing the cops. They need
some of the candidates running in the municipal election want to dramatically cut the budget by hundreds of millions of dollars. Eliminate all frontline police officers.
Because the community is calling for that. There is a lot of uprising of how much they make, how much their budget is.
Yeah.
But really, the government they just showed us they have a lot of money. So if they want to give money to build houses or help the homeless or mental illness, whatever they want to do, they have money for that. They don't have to take it away from the cops. The cops, if you do that to the cops and you take something away from them, then they feel like the community is not supposed to.
So you think it's more of a structural thing or a culture thing within the police service itself? You have to improve the.
That is accountability.
Accountability.
He knows it.
Interesting.
Accountability.
That's the second person.
Cultural thing, the cultural thing.
Right.
That needs to be fixed.
That's what needs to be fixed. Interesting.
Yeah, you can't
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Ali. Thank you for calling. Call me again sometime. Thanks. Bye. Be right back. Rob Snow Show Talkback Hour. Defund the police, the topic for the hour on the Rob Snow Show on City News.
Riding requires attention and focus. No distractions, no moment of unawareness, because one brief moment can cost a lifetime of other moments. Everyone deserves to arrive home.
The Maritime provinces are home to some of the oldest settlements in Canadian history. But did you know that one of the first was actually started by black settlers? Take a minute to learn about the rise and untimely fall of Africville. Black people have lived in Nova Scotia since before the founding of Halifax in 1749, but it wasn't until after the American Revolution in the late 1700s and early 1800s that large groups of black settlers began to arrive in the province, many of whom were former slaves promised freedom and land in Nova Scotia. What they encountered when they arrived, however, was racist treatment by their white neighbors and government officials. This pushed many black people to build homes on the outskirts of town instead. But despite the area receiving little support from government officials and lacking necessities like functioning sewage systems, access to clean water, and proper garbage disposals, the tight-knit community persevered, and so Africville was born. For more than 150 years, the small community grew, expanding from just a few homes to a population of over 400 people. Everything changed, however, in 1964 when plans for a new bridge and the idea of urban renewal prompted the municipality to set its sights on Africville's land. Instead of investing in the community, officials approved a relocation program that promised free job training and employment assistance to help residents through relocation. But the reality wasn't so kind. Residents had their belongings moved in city dump trucks and homes were demolished immediately after their owners left. Of the 400-plus people living in Africville, only 14 residents held clear legal titles to their land, so the rest were only given $500 with the promise of more social aid in the future. Not much else was actually done to support Africville and its residents until 2001, when a United Nations report called for reparations to be paid to the community. In 2010, Halifax Mayor Peter Kelly apologized for the atrocities against Africville as part of a $4.5 million compensation deal. In 2021, Councillor Lindell Smith put forward a 7-part motion to plan for the future of Africville alongside local organizations and the descendants of former residents. Today, there's a public park and museum where Africville once stood to teach visitors about the history of the land and its community. If you've never heard of Africville, you're not alone. The tragic story of this small black community in Nova Scotia is not as well known as it should be.
Hello. On the Rob Snow Show. The phone lines are open at 613-750-1310.
Now, the Rob Snow Show continues.
Defund the police. Support or oppose? That's our question for the hour. As you know, there's a group called, or maybe you don't know this, there's a group called Horizon Ottawa, left-wing group, endorsing candidates in the election. It's endorsed 11 candidates so far, including Jeff Leeper, Sean Menard, not members of the Watson Club, known to be on the left side of things. And this group is also backing many other left-wing candidates for council. And it's putting together, I would say, whatever organization savvy it has to help get Catherine McKenney elected as mayor of Ottawa, which is all well and good, right? It's an election campaign. It's about a battle of ideas. It's about a vision for the city. And this group, along with several other groups, puts out every year what it calls an alternative budget. They call it the people's budget. Okay, this is Mayor Watson's budget. This is the people's budget. They never ask me about it. I'm a person, but what about you, David? Do you ever get put any input into the people's budget there, David? As a person, what would you like to see in the people's budget? Has Horizon Ottawa ever called you and asked you about that? No, of course they haven't.
Not even a tweet.
So part of the people's budget is a call to defund the police. Big time. Like cutting the police budget by hundreds of millions of dollars and cutting the payroll at the Ottawa Police Service by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of officers and civilian employees. I wanted to just explore this with you today because this group is very well organized, very committed, seemingly well funded, very slick website, very skilled spokesperson in Sam Hirsch. And it's fundraising all the time. Donate here, donate here, donate here. And changes in the air. It's a change election. And voter turnout in a municipal election is traditionally abysmal. I'd be amazed if the city cracked 40% this year. So I think if you have an organization that can really motivate people and mobilize people and get out the vote, could have a big impact on the outcome of the municipal election. You may think that defunding the police is a silly idea. But enough voters in the city may elect a council and a mayor that's going to give it a shot and defund the police. And that's why I wanted to put that question to you today. James, Ottawa East. James, hi there.
Yeah.
Yeah, defund the police. Support or oppose?
I'm starting to wonder if I actually am a liberal because I oppose it 100%.
Okay.
So I'm going to take you back to my high school days.
Yeah.
Just for a sec, okay?
Sure.
We had a good police force in town. All right. Remember a couple of my classmates one night, they were playing road hockey, and an OPP cruiser rolls up, and they're like, damn it, you know? All of a sudden the trunk opens, and two cops get out, grab their hockey sticks, and play with them.
Right. Okay.
All right. When I was in high school, if there was a police car in front of the high school, you didn't have to worry about anything. It's because one of the cops was coaching the soccer team.
Okay.
You know, there was a cop who would always go for coffee with one of my buddies who worked at the gatehouse at the mill. So all of a sudden the budget started to decrease, and that stuff didn't happen anymore. And like, do you want to guess what happened after that, or is it kind of just written on the wall for you?
Okay. What happened?
You know,
what happened?
Well, it's just petty crime, just kids going run around doing stupid things, and because the cops, we had to decrease the budget, and the cops had to spend less time in town. They didn't have time to do that stuff.
Okay.
And that to me is essential, community engagement. And I understand, like, if they don't, some people just don't like cops. And then some people think that policing can be done better. Well, I got news for you. Even the cops know policing can be done better. And unfortunately, it does take money. Anti-bias training, sensitivity training, anything. Sending cops to coach hockey teams, whatever, like anything like that.
Right.
You should have cops on duty, I think, like during the day, who aren't really like patrolling, who are just doing, like, go pick up some basketball and, you know what I mean? Like that.
Community outreach. Community outreach.
That's how you're, exactly. Right. That's how you're going to improve things.
Yeah.
It actually, it does take a little bit of money.
Okay.
And I know someone very well in my family who is a police officer, and he'll admit, like, oh yeah, we can do things a lot better. When the George Floyd thing happened, I asked him, and I expected him to kind of say, well, you know, it's a little bit of a gray area, but he said unreservedly, no, that guy is a murderer. Get him in jail right away. Like, the cops aren't bad. Are there bad ones? Yes, there are bad. In every industry you go with, you've probably worked with bad radio people, as I have.
Terrible.
You know, and unfortunately, it does kind of paint them with the same brush.
Okay. So my follow-up question is, how could the Ottawa Police Service better serve the residents of Ottawa?
Like I just...
More community outreach, you would say. More community outreach. Okay, interesting. 100%. Thank you, James. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Angelo. Morning, Angelo.
Oh, good. You?
I'm good. On defund the police, if we did that here in Ottawa, would you support that or would you oppose that?
Absolutely not. And I got two reasons for that.
Okay. All right.
One, because law-abiding citizens like yourself and I like to feel safe in our city, and we pay taxes.
Yeah.
And the criminals, the petty criminals, obviously don't care, and they don't. A majority of them don't have regular jobs, and they don't pay as much taxes as we do. And they'd enjoy the life without cops in our town. They could just run the city to the ground. And number two is because, I was listening to the news on your station this morning. There's a shooting in Ledbury and one on Caldwell and Morissette. We need cops. They protect our city, and they protect the good people like you and I'd say. And, it's the Horizon Ottawa, that radical left group that is putting candidates in every ward, and they want to run the city to the ground. And what do the radical left wings
Well, I don't know. They want to run the city to the ground. They have a different vision for the city. They have a different vision for the city.
You're right.
Okay, all right.
When the city comes crumbling down and they need cops, they run to them. Right?
Okay. All right, Angelo. Thank you. Gotcha. Let's take another one here. Claude in Ottawa. Claude.
Hey, man. How's it going?
It goes. Support or oppose defund the Ottawa Police?
I think the only defunding that I would like to see is when cops get suspended with pay. I think that would help them start taking more accountability.
You want to see an end to that?
I think it's ridiculous. Who gets suspended and go home with pay?
Yeah.
Makes no sense. I get kicked out of work or off the job site. If I can't perform my job properly, I get penalized. I don't go home with the paycheck.
Sure. Yeah.
So
And some of the cops that are in trouble or are under investigation, I mean, some of that stuff takes years to resolve itself. We've seen cases here in Ottawa where police officers are suspended with pay for like 2 years, and then they quit and plead guilty after collecting a paycheck for 2 years.
Yeah, it's like, thanks for the money.
Thanks for the money. I'm guilty, and now I'll go on and do something else, right?
So I think they could save some coin there. I
think that
everybody take accountability.
I believe that would take provincial government action to actually change that. But I understand that's a great frustration. There's a great frustration with that.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Okay, but on just generally speaking, this idea, defund the police.
I think that's the only part I would like to see defunded, because obviously you need cops. You start taking cops off the road, you're going to have more crime. It's just common sense.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay.
All right.
90 seconds. I could take another call here. Mike in Orleans. Mike.
Yes, Rob.
Yes, Mike. Support or oppose defunding the police in Ottawa?
Definitely oppose defunding the police. Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Reason being, a few of them. First being, we absolutely need to govern our streets. We can't just run freely doing whatever we want. Look what happened downtown Ottawa. That's a prime example. Do we want less or do we want more police in a situation like that?
Okay.
For myself, I would like to have seen a little bit more.
Are you talking about the convoy? What happened during the convoy?
The convoy, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more police presence during, that protest going on. I'm a downtown resident myself as well. So, I felt the full effects of everything that went on, as I'm sure many other residents of the city felt.
Okay.
So that's one of the things where, do we want more or less police? Absolutely. Do police need better training? Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think defunding is the right word, though, or where we're going about this. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I don't think we defund them. I think we give them better training, and we support them, because at the end of the day, they are a part of our community. They're community members. They're people, just like you and I.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
So,
Yep. So if I say, how can they better serve the community, the Ottawa Police, you say better training and more support.
I would absolutely say better training. I don't think necessarily defunding them is the right way to go. I say taking the police out of the city is we're asking for anarchy at that point, right? So.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Halftime already. Rob Snow Show. Busy one today. We're talking about defund the police. Give me your opinion on that. And how could the Ottawa Police better serve the community? Could be a big municipal election issue. Love to hear your opinion. This is City News.
News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, August 30th. Good morning. I am Damilola Unime. Right now in Ottawa and Smiths Falls, feels like 33 degrees. It is 25. And here's what's making news this hour. The OSTA says when its schools resume next week, they will be short 33 trips on 20 school routes because of a driver shortage. Last week, the OSTA said it needed 24 more drivers to cover all of its routes. Some grade 7 to 12 students will be transitioned to public transit, and parents with kids who have their routes cancelled will have to find alternative transportation for their children. The OPP is asking you to keep an eye out for a missing 31-year-old man. Joel Newman was last seen yesterday near Dr. John's Lane in Rideau Lakes. He is 6'4" tall and weighs about 180 pounds. He has short brown hair and is clean-shaven. He was last seen wearing jeans and a black T-shirt. Anyone with information is urged to call Leeds OPP. And healthcare will likely be a focus of conversation as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visits Queen's Park to meet with Premier Doug Ford. Ford has been calling for more money for healthcare from the federal government as the province deals with the nursing shortage. Emergency department have closed for hours and even days this summer. The meeting comes as Ontario is set to pass legislation that will force discharged patients to long-term care homes on a temporary basis to help ease the burden on hospitals. City News time is 10:32. I am Damilola Onime. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
It's time to talk back
On the Rob Snow Show.
Have your say and call now.
613-750-1310.
Defund the police. Defund the police in Ottawa. Would you support that? Would you oppose that? And what could the Ottawa Police Service do to improve service to the residents of Ottawa? I'm not some kind of cheerleader for the Ottawa Police Service, as some of the callers have raised already. At the same time, though, I question whether the police service would be able to police Ottawa, given the cuts proposed in this so-called people's budget by the city's proponents for defunding the police. I'm just not sure if it's in the city's best interest. I'm not sure it would work. They have tried this in other cities, and quite likely, quite frankly, it's failed. It's failed where they've tried it. But don't interpret that as me being some kind of cheerleader for the Ottawa Police. I mean, we've covered all the problems with the Ottawa Police Service. No shortage of them. They still don't have a full-time chief. Lots of lingering questions and doubts about the way the police handled the Freedom Convoy right from the very start, basically rolling out the red carpet. Hey, come on in. Set up shop on Wellington Street. And then not doing much in the weeks that followed. And now there are questions this morning about the Ottawa Police Service and how it's handling the St. Bridget's standoff. Counter-protester goes into that church, refuses to leave the stage. The occupiers of the church, this Tupac group, they've been given an eviction notice. They call the cops, and the cops show up and they escort the counter-protester out the door, and the standoff continues. And I think it's totally fair if some are thinking, whose side are you on? If some people are thinking that, that's totally fair. Who knows how many members of the Ottawa Police Service are suspended with pay, to the caller's point, facing some kind of disciplinary action, whatever it is, breach of trust, or accused of corruption in one manner or the other, accused of crimes of a sexual nature. It's a police service with a woeful record, quite frankly, on racial profiling, and the data is all there. All publicly available for anyone who wants to look it up. Morale reported to be low, and the budget keeps going up year after year for this operation. And the budget for the Ottawa Police Service has tripled since amalgamation. Tripled since amalgamation. So it has all sorts of issues. It's going to be a big job, and it's going to take a long time to sort them all out. I don't know if the solution is to defund the whole thing. 750-1310. Michelle in Ottawa South. Michelle.
Good morning, Rob. You had a lawyer on your program not long ago, and he told us that one of the detectives who flew out to shackle Tamara Leach and bring her back was earning $250,000 a year. Now, that I was really disappointed.
Yeah, I don't know if that was accurate, but
Well, I didn't say it. I'm just repeating what I heard.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm assuming he knows what he's talking about because he's a lawyer. But anyway, so when you use detectives in a political game to sue the Prime Minister's bruised ego, that's wrong. And our police should not ever be put in a position where they show a political preference, because that's frightening. But as far as defunding them, absolutely, I do not support it. I just think it's crazy to even suggest it. All you'd have, Rogers used to air a program, it was a ride-along program. And you could, they followed a police officer for the night shift or whatever. And you only had to watch that show a couple of times before you saw how difficult their job was, like the cast of characters that they had to deal with. And another thing, in our society, there is a total lack of respect for them. So they're sworn at, they're spoken to incorrect. It's just, there's no respect whatsoever for these guys. So, I think that there needs to be a public campaign. Like one of your previous callers had said, I remember being a kid and the police would pull over and chat, and they got to know you as a child. And, and then they knew who to speak to when there was trouble. Those things really help a community. And they're very much appreciated. And there's a lot of really good people who've chosen to be police officers, and I'm sure they're wondering, why did I choose this? So we have to show some respect as a society for the people that come to defend us.
Yeah. I don't know, this idea, well, they used to pull down, pull up and pull down over down the window and chat with us and inquire about how we're doing. I don't know, that's kind of like a nostalgic point of view, I guess. And, and maybe you were a nice little white girl at the time living in a nice area of town, Michelle. I don't know. But,
why would that make a difference?
We know it does make a difference. We know it does make a difference, though, right?
The country was predominantly white.
Yeah.
And it was the way it was.
Bad white girl. I know, but this kind of idea, that nostalgic, point in your memory, it doesn't exist for a lot of people in Ottawa now, right, Michelle?
Perhaps,
right?
Perhaps.
No, it's not even perhaps.
You get into a community, and you have, like, over here and behind me, they used to have a community police center right in there. I'm sure those officers knew the people. And those officers were, they were brown-skinned officers that were working in that area. And, did it help? I believe it did help. So I think that there's something to be said about teaching children respect and how to be spoken, how to speak to authority when something's wrong, and to have the sense that you can go to them for help.
Right. I got you down as opposed. What I want you to answer the follow-up question: how can the Ottawa Police better serve the public?
I think we're asking them to wear very many hats, Rob. They show up at a mental health call, and I've experienced that myself. And you get an old guy in the room and he can command the room. You get a younger one and you can see where, there's an emotional response that maybe a bit more training would help with. It's a very difficult job to show up. So would there be a better triage when somebody calls 911 and says, I have somebody here that's having a breakdown and we need help? Maybe that would be delegated to a specific car with trained people in it, and not just expect that everybody that shows up at the door is going to be a mental health worker and understand what's happening. And far too often we've seen this with people who suffer from autism. A person with autism can present very normal, especially an adult, and that person can get into trouble so very quickly, and if somebody shows up and has no clue what they're dealing with.
Okay. All right.
You can't help but feel bad. And it's bad for everybody involved because there's no place to really take those people for real help.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great call. Dave in New Edinburgh. Dave.
Hi. Good morning, Rob.
Hi, Dave. Do you support or oppose defunding the Ottawa Police?
Well, generally, in principle, I would say I would oppose defunding.
Okay.
Although I think we could make our police force a lot more efficient. I would sort of maybe keep the number of officers we have.
Okay.
Maybe give them a little raise after you cut a lot of the administration and, up in the chief's area and that. and if that thing about that detective was true, and that salary, that money that was given out, that's a lot of, that's too top end heavy. I think we could. I just don't like the idea of sort of saying, well, defunding the police automatically means you're taking police off of the street.
Well, I'll tell you, Horizon Ottawa, in its so-called alternative budget, where it calls for defunding the police, this group that's endorsing 11 candidates for council proposes to cut all frontline police.
Well, okay.
All of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in that case, that's just, you've just dug your own grave with that. I'm just sort of thinking in terms of, I wanted to bring up other areas where things could be cut. And the first one was what Doug Ford had done in Toronto, where you cut the number of city councillors in the city. And we have way too many city councillors.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
I think we could sort of divvy it up so that, you have fewer councillors responsible for a wider area.
Okay.
And you could put that money towards the police. There are lots of things you could do. I mean, you say defunding the police, like it sounds like, well, they're doing harm and we need to get rid of them. Police are doing, pretty much all they can do, and generally they're all good people. It's when they have to rearrest people who are let out by the legal system and breaching probation, and it goes on and on. Well, that's a pretty tough job. And to say you want to defund that, well, if you want to end up like Seattle or some of the cities in California, well, you already know what's going to happen.
Okay. All right, Dave. Thank you. Yeah, just so, okay, thank you. The people's budget, the so-called alternative budget, in its call to defund the police, calls it defunded and detasked. Cut all frontline police, all of it. And the estimate is that would save $133 million a year, and then it proposes eliminating 75% of the non-frontline police staff. And the claim is that would save $90 million a year, so like no more police cars, no more police stations, no more police in police stations. Very few staff in police stations, maybe very few police stations at all. It also says that Crime Prevention Ottawa should be scrapped because why even try to prevent crime in the first place through things like youth diversion programs and stuff like that? That is a defunding of the Ottawa Police by about $224 million a year. The 2022 police budget, $346 million, so a cut of 65%. That's the proposal. Okay, that's what defunding the police in Ottawa would look like. Amanda in Ottawa. Good morning. You're on City News, Amanda.
Good morning, Rob. Huge fan.
Thank you. Do you support or oppose defunding the police?
So, if you were to have asked me 3 months ago, I would have been in support. I think the intensity of what's on the table right now of culling the amount of police we have isn't the way to go about it.
Okay.
So I do have a unique perspective as a child of a police officer. He gave 32 years, 12 of which was a detective.
Okay.
And then my mother is a social worker.
Wow,
So
okay, all right.
I was privy.
So you're like immersed in this culture then, right? So
Precisely.
Yeah.
And we were a foster family. We always had foster children that lived with us. And I was privy to a number of conversations among those two camps where, they were trading their war stories, if you will. Mm-hmm. And there were so many circumstances where, as previous callers mentioned, a police officer was called to a mental health situation or to somebody with disabilities who really required a different skill set than what the police officers are prepared for. So the options on the table, the whole tag of defund the police, I think was poorly tabled right off the bat.
Right.
More so of expanding frontline services, support the police force with those that carry the skill set and training to help diffuse those situations.
Right.
We ask so much of our police officers. And I know I have 3 children, all of which I've gone out of my way to teach them that police are approachable and they're here to help. But then, you know, as a millennial, when we are blasted with the data of how much police brutality is there, that obviously speaks to, you know, a cultural and a training issue. All that to say, in my perfect world of leaving my children with this society, is that there's a triage system of support where police and social workers and mental health workers can work collaboratively, because that's not really what happens nowadays. And so, nor as I was growing up. So I do feel that Ottawa needs to make huge effort in getting more, you know, multicultural culture within our police force.
Right.
And then just to touch on the Tupac conversation that came up earlier, this isn't the police responsibility. This is a landlord-tenant commercial agreement. It's going through the court system. They're going through the hoops. And if we just wait it out, it's going to sort itself out. But all that to say, the police coming in and removing a counter-protester, to me, does not speak to any political alignment whatsoever. They're just trying to keep peace, which is... So, defund the police, I think, is terribly stated.
Okay.
Do they need further support? Yes. And do I think that police should be responsible to deal with mental health crises? No. I don't think that should be tabled further on them.
Gotcha.
So,
Thank you. Great call, Amanda. Thank you. Call back anytime. Bye-bye. 1047. Time to take your call on defund the police, which I think is going to be a hot election issue, going to be a great debate in the city over the next 2 months on defund the police. Have your say right now at 750-1310 on the Rob Snow Show on City News.
If you don't want to die young, you're going to have to get old. Don't keep that home fire burning, gonna wake up cold. Be thankful for the sunrise for each and every day, 'cause it only takes one lightning strike, take it all away. You can't blame the water, you can't blame the drink, you can always blame the devil, he gets blamed for a lot of things. Darling, I can tell you that blaming won't get you far. It's only walking through the fire they learn just who you are.
If you talk while your mind is racing, you can't say what's really true. If you love while your heart is racing, it gets hard to follow through. You get caught stealing daylight, you're gonna have to do the time. 'Cause pennies don't fall from heaven, and a nickel ain't worth a dime. You can't blame the water, you can't blame the drink, you can always blame the devil, he gets blamed for a lot of things. Darling, I can tell you that blaming won't get you far. It's only walking through the fire they learn just who you are. Can be angry as lightning, bitter as the wind, can rattle your sword like a storm coming in. Can be cold as a rock, mean as a snake, hard as a bullet, never own your mistake. Put your money on the same old pony, he ain't paid out yet. Seems he always comes up lame, you always lose your bet. You can't get to paradise trading on magic beans, 'cause reaching for the sky is harder than it seems. You can't blame the water, you can't blame the drink, you can always blame the devil, he gets blamed for a lot of things. Darling, I can tell you that blaming won't get you far. It's only walking through the fire they learn
lines are open at 613-750-1310.
Now, the Rob Snow Show continues.
Continues with defund the police here in Ottawa. Just talking about this alternative budget, the people's budget, that proposes defunding the police from Horizon Ottawa, which has endorsed 11 candidates for city council. Cut the police budget by 65%, cut all frontline police, cut the support staff for the Ottawa Police, cut that by 75%. And it's a cut of $224 million. You take that $224 million and you spend it on what it calls community-based alternatives, which would include community workers, harm reduction workers, so supervised injection sites, that kind of thing, nurse practitioners, disarmed traffic enforcement responses, mental health crisis response, something called, David, a violence interruption team. Violence interruption team. Kind of sounds like the police.
Is that not what they do already?
Isn't that like the police?
I should hope they do.
Let's call the violence interruption team.
I hope the police are in.
Call 911. What do you need? Fire, ambulance, or the violence interruption team? I don't know. Community liaison workers and generalized crisis response, which also kind of sounds like the police. But nevertheless, the proposal is to cut the police budget by 65%, and that's what defund the police in Ottawa looks like, according to Horizon Ottawa. So if we did that here, would you support that, oppose that? What way are you leaning on that? Jen in the South End. Jen.
Hey, so we already have crime going up. Why would we want to take out? My 3 points I want to make is when I was a child, we used to see those officers taking underprivileged children Christmas shopping every year. They would do this for weeks leading up to Christmas. This was out of their own time. They weren't paid to do it. They volunteered to do this. Yeah, granted, we had COVID, so that's why we haven't done it, but I haven't seen that in years.
Okay.
Second, they took out the resource officers out of the high school.
Yeah.
Now, we have high schools. I have 4 children. I keep my kids in schools that have low enrollment, so 400 or 500 students. I don't want them in a school with thousands of kids, but there are high schools that have 1,200, 1,300 students. You take the resource officers out of there, and it's like running wild. You know, majority of students, I also drove school bus for many years. Majority of students who are from a different race or a different country who have come here to start a new life, and say they get into trouble, those kids. A lot of those parents can't even speak English. So when their kids get in trouble, there's no repercussions for it. So that's another reason why we need these resource officers in the school. But no, we took those out. Another point I want to make is you used to drive down the road. You used to see officers pulling people over all the time. And, I'm not being funny about it.
I haven't seen that in a long time.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm in my 40s, and I used to drive by, and I used to go, look at that one getting pulled over. You know what I mean?
Well, that's all been replaced by, basically the speed boards and photo radar and all that, because people complain, why do we need a $100,000 a year police officer to do speed traps? Jen, right? Some people question whether that was the proper use of resources at the time. Oh, I lost her. Or either that or she hung up on me. I don't know. Could be one, could be the other. Taz in Ottawa. Taz?
Yes.
Hi, Taz.
The history of policing can go long. I think I've heard a lot of people talk, and they're saying pretty much almost the same thing. But, it goes back maybe 20, 30 years when the police became more militarized, and then we don't have that same affection. We feel like they're out of touch. And so I think community policing, which has been mentioned in the past, could probably, which is similar to outreach, but it's more grounded in community, community in the neighborhood, would probably make a big difference, like they have in some Nordic countries. Then you have also proactive policing where their presence is felt, and therefore, petty crime won't get out of control like we see in the downtown area.
Okay.
I think that those are things, that we need to look at also. I would say look at evidence-based policing, it goes on and on, but to completely take them out, no, absolutely not.
What do you mean evidence-based? What does that mean?
Well, I don't know. I'm just looking at a bullet point here, but community policing. Give me the community back to the area, but policing. I believe it's cheaper. But you and I talked maybe years ago about the street ambassadors. Some signs of people that are doing some other stuff, auxiliary work. CPR, first aid, giving people information.
Okay.
That could definitely help, and the fact that the presence is there would make people much safer and report crime to them instead of calling 911 to report crime. That goes to
building relationships.
Yeah, neighborhood.
Community outreach. Community outreach. Yep. Okay, interesting. Thank you. I'm writing these down. I just want to see if there are any kind of themes that I see here. Bill in Ottawa. Bill.
How are you doing, Rob?
Good, Bill. Thank you. Defund the police. Yes, no?
100% disagree as a reformed criminal. I grew up in a pretty violent household as a child. Yeah. No fault of my own.
Okay.
And because of that, I used to deal with it with anger and getting in fights well up into my late 20s. And 90% of my arresting officers would, at the time of my arrest, in the back of the cruiser, would sit there and have a heart-to-heart with me and tell me, this is where you're ending up. This is where this life is going to lead you, and because of them, I decided to change my life around, as well as the love of a good woman.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Okay. So not a lot of support, I would say, for defunding the police as it's envisioned, say, by Horizon Ottawa, but certainly far from, kind of like me, far from and it's not as though everybody's a cheerleader for the Ottawa Police Service. Number of things came up. Accountability, a big issue for the callers. That is something that needs to be improved. Better training, whether it's dealing with racialized communities or people suffering from mental health crisis, and more support for police in what they deal with and what they see on the front lines. And something that came up over and over again: community policing, community outreach, being proactive in the community, visible in the community, and proactive. I found that interesting. So thanks for the discussion. Be back right after the 11 o'clock news here on City News.
one for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, August 30th. Good morning. I am Damilola Unime. Right now in Ottawa and in Smiths Falls, it feels like 33 degrees, but it is 25. And here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. A high-level meeting at the provincial legislature this afternoon. With the details, here's City News reporter Charlene Close.
Premier Doug Ford will welcome Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to the Ontario Legislature at 4 o'clock this afternoon. It's behind closed doors, so we won't be able to tell you exactly what was said, but the two will take part in a photo op, so we might get a couple of hints from that. Ford has been publicly calling on the federal government to give this province more money for health care. It's as his own government is under fire for appearing not to be doing enough. Many hospitals in Ontario are being crushed under the pressure of a nurses shortage. Emergency departments and ICUs have been closed for hours or even days this summer. Ford and his health minister Sylvia Jones have both avoided using crisis as a description, even though many doctors and nurses call it just that. Charlene Close, City News.
Meanwhile, Ontario's Progressive Conservative government is set to move its controversial long-term care bill to the next stage today. The province passed a motion yesterday to send the bill that would allow hospital patients awaiting long-term care to be transferred to a home without their consent directly to third reading. Now, that means there will be no public hearing or consideration by a committee. Third reading of the bill is set for this afternoon once it passes the second reading vote. Critics say skipping the public hearing is undemocratic. With the weather forecast for Ottawa and the Valley, here is City News meteorologist Jill Taylor.
Very unsettled conditions for us today for Ottawa, the Valley, Smiths Falls, with the showers and thunderstorms at times, and that will continue into the evening. Still on the muggy side as well. The high 26 degrees will feel like 35, 17 for the low. Tomorrow, cloudy with showers and a brisk west wind near 24. For today, the high 26.
City News time is 11:03. The 7 candidates vying for leadership of the United Conservative Party of Alberta will meet tonight in Edmonton for a final debate. Now, candidates are now focused on winning support from members as their first or second choice as leader of the provincial ballot. Hockey Canada's CEO is staying in his role despite growing calls for a leadership change amid the scandal around the organization's handling of sexual assault allegations against players. City News parliamentary reporter Cormac McSweeney with the story.
In a statement posted to the Hockey Canada website, Interim Chair Andrea Skinner announced the Board of Directors is fully in support of Chief Executive Officer Scott Smith. This despite the increasing pressure for more leadership changes in the organization following intense scrutiny over the way it's dealt with sexual assault allegations made against members of previous men's national junior hockey teams. Board Chair Michael Brindamore stepped down August 6th. His term was set to end in November. The federal government has pulled funding from the organization, and many sponsors have pulled out after revelations of an alleged sexual assault in 2018 involving several members of that year's team. There's also another allegation of an incident from 2003. Police in London and Halifax are investigating both. Cormac McSweeney, Parliament Hill.
I am Damilola Unime. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
The world is changing.
So keep up with Rob.
The Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
He's my friend on the right side of things. Back with us on the Rob Snow Show on City News. He is syndicated columnist, former speechwriter for Stephen Harper, Michael Taube. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Rob. How are you?
Great. You had a column in the National Post recently describing Jean Charest as the greatest threat to conservative unity in this country. Why do you see it that way?
Because, unfortunately, what a lot of people have missed during this race, which is either because they're not aware of it or they just don't simply want to reveal it one way or the other. And you and I have talked about it, Rob. Jean Charest is actually the one choice where conservatives cannot unite on whatsoever, in the sense that, as I sort of alluded to in my column, Jean Charest represents the old red Tory type thinking or left-leaning conservatism, which is a milquetoast version of conservatism today. It does not mesh with the modern small c conservatism that we see in the party currently represented by most of the members, which would be classified as blue Toryism or right-leaning conservatism, that is primarily represented by the acknowledged frontrunner in the race, Pierre Poilievre. So when you look at that and you look at Jean Charest's history as a Quebec Liberal premier and many of the spending procedures that he did and many of the measures that he supported at the time provincially, including, fighting against the dissolution of the National Gun Registry and suggesting that he was going to create a provincial equivalent briefly, the fact that he had Kyoto-like type provincial measures in Quebec when he was premier, many raising taxes in varieties of ways, including raising taxes on university tuition fees. He has never really been a fiscal conservative, at least in the way that we define it. Again, he's a nice man. I've known him for years. There's nothing wrong with him on a personal level. He's a person that many conservatives and many Canadians in general would happily break bread with. But when it comes to his version of conservatism, which is debatable, and it comes to his ideas, which do not represent conservative values whatsoever, and have not just for days, weeks, months, years, but decades. It has been decades since the Conservative Party ever sort of aligned themselves with concepts like that, well beyond the days of, say, Brian Mulroney, who was then leader of the Progressive Conservatives, which no longer exist, are part now. Obviously, that party merged with the Canadian Alliance to form what is now the modern Conservative Party in 2003.
Right.
Those sorts of ideas, Rob, are not prevalent in Canadian conservatism. And the fact that there still are red Tories, of course there are. Will there always be red Tories? Absolutely. Do they basically lead the party, or do they dictate what this party believes in? Absolutely not.
Okay. There's an old line, winning cures everything?
Not always.
Winning cures everything?
Not always, I'm afraid.
Not in this case?
Nope.
No?
He will,
because the polls suggest he would have an easier time of it in winning a general election than Paul.
No, he wouldn't. In fact, that's a myth as well.
That's a myth? Okay.
No, very quickly, that mythology I've never quite understood, because if you look at the Leger poll, which shows that Poilievre is the most supported candidate among conservative supporters versus the way Canadians look at it, the problem is, and I discussed it in there, it's also not taking into consideration the fact that Pierre Poilievre is leading a type of conservative movement with not only small c conservative values, but also outside the box type thinking on issues like affordable housing, cryptocurrency, things that conservatives don't align with, that you couldn't take into account in a poll because it's basically happening as is and has no history in this country. So, unfortunately, no, a lot of what you said is just not attainable.
Okay. So if he wins, no, he's not going to win, but let's say he did.
No, he's not.
All right, let's say he did, though.
Sure.
Because it's fun.
Sure.
Speculation is part of the political conversation, right? So, what would happen? What would happen, do you think? Do you see two forces emerging again? Eastern Canadian milquetoast progressive conservative red Tories and Western reformers, or something like that?
Well, look, as I said to you, and I've said this to others too, when you're battling for the heart and soul of the party, which really this is what this leadership race is about, there will be splinters. There will be splinters if Poilievre becomes leader. There would be splinters if Lewis, Acheson, or Baber became leader. There will obviously be massive splinters if Charest becomes leader. We knew this was going to happen, and any conservative who basically said this was one big happy party with a kumbaya moment and that the big tent will stay up afloat, I think a lot of us knew this was coming. We just didn't know when. And the breaks have existed, obviously, since my old friend and boss Stephen Harper left politics in 2015. But at the same time, 2016, he lost the 2015 election, left the next year. We all knew that when he and others started to go, that there would be a time when the Conservative Party would have to reevaluate itself, think about what issues matter, whether they wanted to keep Harper's legacy of basically an incremental type conservatism to move forward, or whether they wanted to move one way or the other. So it happens to be that this leadership race is going to be pivotal, as it turned out. But no, if Charest became leader, you would see that a lot of blue Tories, and that makes up more than 2/3 of the current Conservative Party membership, which means that a lot of the people coming in might be supportive of Mr. Charest, but a lot of people who are there are not.
Right.
That could lead to, it could be a seismic split to the point where it benefits parties like the People's Party of Canada, for example. It could lead to, theoretically, to another political party. You would hope that none of this would happen, but unfortunately, I think it's very likely.
I've heard it from a lot of people who say, if Sean Charest is leading this party, I will not be supporting this party. Lots of people. Of people. Boy, it's amazing, Michael. The crowd's still coming out. Big numbers. Jenny Byrne, his campaign chair, like Nanaimo, Vancouver.
Yeah.
Big crowd last night. And then I can't help but compare that. Omar El Gabra, the transport minister, who's having all kinds of problems because of the situation at the airport, tweeted an event in Toronto, and it was like, great liberal energy in this room, and there may have been a half a dozen people there. And they're just kind of standing around talking.
I know. No, you know what? I mean, but with all due respect to him, I mean, Mr. Alabra, much like most liberals, he's kind of trapped. They know that nobody has ever seen anything quite like what Pierre Poilievre is bringing out to a room. And when people are saying that, and not just conservatives, they're not saying it for bluster. These are people who are battle-worn veterans. These are people who really understand the ins and outs of politics, and I'd like to think I'm part of it. We've never seen things like this before. Poilievre, what he brought out, if your listeners have not seen it, go look up his event in Nanaimo, BC. It's been posted on social media. It's very easy to find. The room, the hall is completely packed to the gills. I have never seen anything quite like this in the more than 25 years, 30 plus actually, that I've been involved in politics. It's an extraordinary thing to watch. And that's why when you sort of said to me, can Charest win? The answer is no, not because I'm being nasty or vicious to Mr. Charest. It's quite clear it's not going to happen. And with the Conservative Party numbers now coming out in terms of the number of members who voted, with the total amount being roughly about 51% of the total that you and I have talked about, which was 650,000 plus. Well, guess what? If Poilievre actually had almost half of them, and it's decreased by that much, you'd have to believe a lot of it was support that bled from the old Patrick Brown campaign. It means that a lot of Charest people are not coming through. It means that the remaining three candidates, what little support they have, is obviously being bled dry. And it should be, I think, a first ballot victory for Poilievre with at least 55% or more.
Okay. Speaking of vicious and nasty, let's talk about what happened in Grand Prairie, Alberta.
Okay.
To the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland. We played this yesterday. Let's play it again this morning. Go ahead.
Cheers. Elliot. Great, that's Christina.
Chrystia, what are you doing in Alberta? You get this province.
You don't belong here.
You're a you.
Yeah, go ahead and hide.
All right, guys, you got a trade elevator. Chrystia Freeland, I'm going. No. I'll walk up my own power. Don't touch me, okay? Don't touch me. Go.
Just brutal.
We are
do
leaving.
not touch me.
Brutal.
We are leaving.
What do you think? What do you think of that, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no defense of it. And I actually did tweet, as many other conservatives have over the next, past few days have tweeted out too. It's one thing for this gentleman to be opposed to the Trudeau Liberals and to vocally speak out about them. That's a healthy part of our democracy, and it's something that we should never negate. It's something that we should always propagate. You have the right to like or dislike something. The problem is what he did was beyond the pale. It was disgusting. It was offensive. And yeah, I know some people are saying, but all he did was swear at her. Yeah, but no public official should have to face something like that. It doesn't matter whether it's a woman or a man. No one should have to face something like that, because that's not why they got into politics. They got into politics for a variety of reasons, but one of them is to help individuals and to deal with people. When you see scenes like that, it discourages a lot of good people from ever considering to run, whether they're on the left of the political spectrum or the right.
Now, I want to move on from there to Poilievre was asked about this by a news reporter, I believe when he was in Victoria, I think.
Victoria.
Yeah.
Rob Shaw.
Okay. So, what do you think about it? Let's play the clip of Poilievre's response, please. Go ahead.
Well, it's absolutely unacceptable. And I can relate, of course, because I've been the subject of so much online harassment and abuse. My wife has received so much horrific material directly to her social media account that we've had to hire a private security firm to protect our family against all of that abuse. So unfortunately, this is all too common and all too long-standing. We have to put an end to it and demand that everybody treat other Canadians with respect when we debate political ideas.
Now, see, I thought that was a perfectly reasonable response to the question, and yet some are saying, well, he's making it all about him. Well, about him and his wife and the abuse that they've been subject to and the fact that they have had to hire a security firm to protect them. And the suggestion is that he bears some of the responsibility for the way that man behaved in Grand Prairie, Alberta, which I don't think so. What do you think, Michael?
No, I don't at all. And actually, there's another part to the story that should be brought up. It's not just because it's in my Troy Media column today, but other people have brought it to people's attention. That same gentleman actually confronted Pierre Poilievre the previous month and basically made him feel quite uncomfortable. The actual video was interesting. It was scrubbed off TikTok, from what I understand, but a couple people caught it, and actually my Troy Media syndicated column includes a link to one of a small handful of people who I guess either preserved the video or saved it in some fashion.
Okay.
And that's why he was putting himself or inserted himself in the debate, because as you probably saw, Rob, some people were saying, well, why is he making it about himself? Because it's the same person who went after him. And when everyone's starting to say, as you allude to in your question, that Pierre Poilievre is the cause of this, either directly or indirectly, because of the language he's using, the ideas he's promoting, the people he's meeting, the people who are supporting him, et cetera, no. It's because, one, he identifies with it because the same person accosted him who accosted Chrystia Freeland, and it was wrong in both instances. Two, it is true, apparently, that Anita Poilievre, his wife, has apparently received a lot of abuse. And yes, from what I do understand, that security firm is protecting them right now because it's been pretty awful through the whole thing. So when you put it all together, no, Poilievre is not to blame for all this. And no, Poilievre has nothing to do with it, much the same way that a lot of other people have nothing to do with it. This gentleman and the woman accompanying him, who maybe his wife, his partner, I don't know who she is, they have obviously gone out and done this, or he individually has gone out and done this on his own volition, and it's just wrong what he's doing because he's giving Albertans a bad name. He's giving the good people of Grand Prairie a bad name. He's giving Canadians a bad name because in the end, whether you agree or disagree with a politician, whether it's Chrystia Freeland, Pierre Poilievre, or whomever, you should be at least big enough or have the ability to agree to disagree and discuss things as intelligently.
It's about the battle of ideas. It's not about intimidation and
no, it's not.
Vulgarity and these sorts of things. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, well said, Mike. Tomorrow is the 25th anniversary of the death of Princess Diana. For me, it's one of those where were you when moments. We have these at rare times in our lives. Where were you when the planes hit the Twin Towers? Where were you when man landed on the moon, JFK was shot? This was one of those times for people of a certain vintage.
Yeah.
Michael Taube, where were you when?
going to be honest with you. I thought about it when the question was sent to me by your producer, David Smith, and I actually don't remember where I was when I first heard it. I know that I was watching the news. That I do recall. So I was probably at home at the time, but I do remember speaking with Rosa, who is now my wife. We were dating at the time. We did discuss that issue. So that's what I remember, because you and I have talked about this, much like your wife is fascinated by the royal family, so is mine. So, and my wife was always fascinated by Princess Diana, and has to this day continued to read a lot of literature about her, books, magazine articles, etc., watches TV specials, listens to radio, etc., etc. So it's really obviously of a great interest to her, but that's what I remember about it. I remember speaking with her, and she was shattered. She was heartbroken. She was shocked, like many people were, because they just never expected this to happen to her, and she died so young, so tragically, and in a situation that could have been easily avoided.
Yeah. What do you remember most about Princess Diana? Like if somebody said, well, when you think about Princess Diana, what do you what do you think about?
That's a good question. I guess missed opportunities.
Missed opportunities. Paparazzi comes to mind for me. How and just the like the unending chase. Her brother, the Earl, I remember he gave the eulogy at the funeral. Said Earl Spencer said she was the most hunted woman in history. Yeah, they were just merciless. You know, she out on a yacht in the middle of the ocean, and they're still using the lenses, the long lenses, to try and take pictures of her, and just the salacious stories in the tabloid media about her. It was just, I can't imagine what that life must have been like.
No, and it's not a life that anyone would want, quite frankly. I agree with you. I mean, was she the most hunted? I don't know about that. She was certainly one of the, and she was obviously tabloid fodder, not just in the UK, but around the world. And yes, I mean, there were paparazzi, from what I understand, who were specifically sent to her beat, which basically meant that they just tailed her everywhere she went. Home, vacation, out to dinner, etc. And you're right, paparazzi is a good word, even though she wasn't part of the paparazzi. When I think of her, the paparazzi is certainly part of the fact that she died so young and so tragically. And I mean, I guess me, it's just missed opportunity, because this was a person who could have had her marriage with Prince Charles lasted, and that's a whole separate topic in itself. But if things had been different, she could have been a very powerful figure and an important figure for the royal family, especially during a time when you have
they could use it right now.
Markle and Harry come out, and Meghan Markle, comparing her marriage to Harry as the second coming of Nelson Mandela. I mean, oh God. I know. And that's the problem. See, Princess Diana had her faults, for sure. But at the same time, she was a more level-headed representative of the royal family, even a former member of the royal family. And it's just a shame that she wasn't able to lead the private life that she wanted.
Yeah. You're a big fan of tennis, and you tweet a lot about tennis. And this is one for the ages here, because Serena Williams playing in her final U.S. Open, maybe the greatest female tennis player of all time, one of the greatest athletes of all time. Wouldn't it be a story if she won the thing? But what are the chances of something like that happening?
Very slim.
Very slim.
That's nothing against her. It's just that she has not been on court very much the past couple of years. We saw what happened in the first round of Wimbledon earlier. The good news is at the U.S. Open, she won last night, so she's off to a good start. And this is a tournament that she has excelled at. In fact, this was the tournament where her first Grand Slam victory came in 1999 against Martina Hingis. So, which is a long time ago.
That is a long time ago, yeah.
But can she win this? Look, if the draw suddenly opens dramatically and her confidence builds up, which she doesn't have a lot of right now, and everything sort of moves her way, it's possible she could have a very deep run into the quarterfinals, semifinals. I think somehow maybe magically make it into the final. If she had played better at other Grand Slams or had won a few tournaments leading up to the U.S. Open, there would have been, at least if nothing else, some serious consideration that maybe she can do it in her final tournament. It's possible. I just don't think so. But no matter what, she will give it a great effort. I'm sure she'll go at least into the fourth round of the tournament the way she's playing, because she's pretty tough. And, between her and Margaret Court, Martina Navratilova, Chris Evert-Lloyd, et cetera, there are a lot of players who obviously should stand way up in terms of the greatest female tennis player. Suzanne Lalonde. There's many other people you can add to the list. But Serena Williams definitely deserves to be part of the discussion. And after 23 Grand Slam singles titles, that doesn't include the 14 that she won with her sister Venus at the Grand Slams too. I mean, that's a total of 37.
Wow.
Plus 2 mixed titles. The woman has 39 Grand Slam titles to her name, which is an extraordinary achievement, matched by very, very few people, and probably will be unmatched for a period of time now that the tennis has sort of devolved itself that the tops 1 through 10 are now, they still play well, but they're more beatable now than they were before. You'd think that her records will hold up for quite some time. She's just an astonishing person. She was an enigma in this game. She was a brilliant tennis player. I'm sure she'll, after her career is over, most likely after this tournament, she will continue to do good things. And she deserves the adulation of the court, especially the U.S. Open, which, again, the U.S. is her home country. They recognize her talents. They recognize what she accomplished. They know what she did for tennis, for, young Black Americans and many others. She was a role model for many people, and she deserves every great moment and then some if this is her final tournament.
Thanks for the discussion this week, Michael.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we'll speak soon. Yep, that is syndicated columnist and former speechwriter for Stephen Harper, Michael Taube. We'll be back right after the news on City News.
The Center of Excellence in Frailty-Informed Care at Pearly Health conducts applied research that focuses on the development of best practices. And really, the goal of the Center of Excellence is to optimize care and quality of life for older adults living with frailty.
Well, yeah, and that comes to the latest research when it comes to adults living with frailty, older adults, as you said. What is some of the latest research that you've seen?
Yeah, so we're really proud of a recent study that's coming out of the Center of Excellence focusing on our CME Understanding Frailty Together program. So CME is an approach to caring for older adults living with frailty, and it really focuses on the assessment and management of frailty in long-term care. So what's really unique about the program is that it was developed in long-term care and it's designed for long-term care. It really focuses on early and transparent communication with families and with residents so that they really have a good understanding of the health status of their loved one and then can make decisions about their care and their future goals of care in that context of frailty, understanding what those risks are of a particular intervention or course of treatment.
Danielle, when we say frailty, what exactly do we mean by that?
Yeah, so frailty is a medical condition. It leads to a decline in function and health. And people that are more severely frail are more susceptible to large declines in their health. So if they do suffer from a minor illness, they're less able to cope with that illness, and they're more subject to rapid declines in their overall health.
When it comes to sort of interventions, I guess there's some are more invasive, some are less invasive. I know you're obviously, looking at the less invasive, but what exactly do we mean by that? Like, can you give us an idea of some of those invasive interventions that we've seen in the past?
Yeah, so the CME program revolves around, again, assessing the risks of particular interventions. So someone who is frail, let's say, and has a fall, one of the courses of treatment could be going to the hospital. But someone who's very frail needs to understand, and their families need to understand, what the implications of going to the hospital could be for someone who has that level of frailty. So the CME program helps them understand those risks and take into account really their values and their preferences and their goals of care to help them make the best decision for them.
Today is a very exciting day. We are officially opening the Interzip Rogers for the summer season of this year. Last year we were expecting to have maybe 20,000 people, and we actually had over 30,000 riders for the first year. So we're really excited to reopen this year.
That was epic and scary!
You have a really different perspective view-wise of the area we're in. So you have a clear view of the Parliament. Obviously you're crossing the river, and of course you're moving from a province to another, which is unique of this zip line. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Rogers has been partners even before Interzip opened, actually. They were all in the first meeting we had with Rogers, and that for us was really a nice commitment. We're really fortunate to have Rogers with us, and on top of having Rogers, it's basically the name of the zipline, which is the Interzip Rogers, that is now pretty much renowned across the country.
Rogers Interzip is a great activity for people who live in or visit the National Capital Region. Get out and have an opportunity to zip across the Ottawa River between Ottawa and Outaouais.
News in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Tuesday, August 30th. Good morning, I'm Danielle Bain. Right now in Ottawa and Smiths Falls, it's 25 degrees, mostly cloudy skies. Here's what's making news this hour. The Ontario Student Transportation Authority says when school resumes next week, they will be short 33 trips on 20 school bus routes because of a driver shortage. Last week, the OSTA said it needed 27 more drivers to cover all its routes. Some grades 7 to 12 students will be transitioned to public transit, and parents with kids who have their routes canceled will have to find alternative transportation for their children. The board of directors at Hockey Canada is in full support of the organization's CEO, despite the scandal around the handling of sexual assault allegations against players from previous national junior men's teams. Hockey Canada CEO Scott Smith is not stepping down anytime soon. According to a statement on the organization's website, interim chair Andrea Skinner says the board of directors is in full support of the CEO and the entire executive team. Healthcare will likely be a focus of conversation as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visits Queen's Park to meet with Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Ford has been calling for more money for healthcare from the federal government as the province deals with a nursing shortage. Emergency departments have closed for hours and even days this summer. The meeting comes as Ontario is set to pass legislation that will force discharged patients to long-term care homes on a temporary basis to help ease the burden on hospitals. City News Time 11:34. I'm Danielle Bain for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Firm.
Fair.
Fun.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM
and 1310 AM.
The state of California will require that all new cars, all new trucks and SUVs sold in the state run on electricity or hydrogen by the year 2035. And I find that to be very interesting. California has a population, it's approaching 40 million people, so it's about the same population as Canada. It has an economy that's just slightly larger than Canada's economy. And you have a state government that is mandating all vehicles sold in the state by the year 2035 will have to be either electric powered or hydrogen powered. So let's get some expert insight into how realistic this time frame is, 2035. J.F. Champagne is the president of the Automotive Industries Association of Canada, and he joins me this morning on City News. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob.
Yeah, really nice to hear from you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for the invite.
What do you think about this announcement out of the government of California?
Well, it really, mirrors, similar federal government announcement we've heard here. We have a mandate by the federal government to have at least 20% of new passenger vehicles sold in Canada to be zero emission by 2026, at least 60% by 2030, and getting to 100% by 2035. So very much aligned with what you've heard from California.
Okay. How realistic is it?
Well, quite frankly, those are very aspirational. Aspirational is probably the word we have to use.
Aspirational, okay.
I think, the automotive industries is not opposed to the adoptions of electric vehicle, but it's a question of how fast can you get the infrastructure in place. It's a question of how fast can we introduce all of these new vehicles, and whether or not consumer wants to buy these vehicles as well. But the underlying issue as well is how are we going to get these cars serviced after they're being sold? Because they're increasingly computers on wheel, and for automakers now, this is becoming increasingly difficult or almost impossible for consumers to get these modern vehicles repaired by your own local auto repair shop that you've been doing business with for a long time, probably.
Okay, so let's talk. You mentioned that's one of the challenges. What are some of the other challenges? For example, we hear a lot about the need to source materials, whether that's nickel or some of the rare earth elements. Can you speak to that, please?
Essentially, the production of a traditional internal combustion engine has been over the generations now something they could produce at very low cost. So, you look at your engine today, wow, there's a lot of components to it, but the reality for an automaker, there isn't a lot of the cost associated with that. When you start to produce an EV, it's very different because there's a lot more components in the battery pack that are much more expensive to source. And that is not going to change so much over time, we believe. And so it is going to be a vehicle that is harder to produce at a lower price point. And you've noticed that most of EVs today available more or less fall into what we call the luxury category of vehicle. And there hasn't been many vehicles that are priced for the average consumer, and that's going to continue to be a challenge.
Right. Like where's the Corolla electric vehicle or the Civic or something like that, right?
That's right. And
right.
so again,
okay.
if the core components of the EVs are very expensive to produce, you're going to be selling a vehicle more in the luxury category, because then there's a bit more money into it, but it's very hard to do a mass market vehicle. But again, also includes, how much you're going to spend to maintain and service that vehicle over time is also the big question.
Okay. With the traditional auto sector, the industry is very integrated. The United States, Canada, Mexico, very integrated supply chains. I've been told you could have auto parts that will cross the U.S.-Mexico border, the Canada-U.S. border, maybe multiple times before the final vehicle is assembled somewhere. When it comes to the manufacture of EVs right now, how integrated are the industries? Because it seems everyone's in a real fight to get the most out of the industry right now. So I'm wondering how integrated they are.
That industry has been now integrated for a full generation. If you go back to the origin of NAFTA, the first NAFTA, it really drove these manufacturers to work in a very integrated fashion, and that's what we see us also on the EV front. And the best example is we've seen over the generation, Canadians used to drive very different vehicle than our U.S. counterparts. Nowadays, we pretty much drive the same type of vehicles, and that's going to continue.
Okay. The wording of the language in the incentive program that was passed by the U.S. Congress, rebates for North American-produced vehicles instead of just American-produced vehicles. How important is that for the industry?
Well, wherever there are subsidies for the purchase of EVs, you're going to see an uptick in consumer buying vehicle. When Ontario eliminated the rebate, you saw that the uptick on the purchase of EVs in Ontario just went down. So it is very important at this point, because again of the differences in pricing between the internal combustion engines and the EV, that in fact you continue to have those subsidies.
What do consumers want in an electric vehicle? You mentioned, Mr. Champagne, for example. Do some consumers really want to buy an electric vehicle? I'm wondering what may be causing them to think about that choice right now. I think about you have range anxiety, the availability of charging stations, the cost not just initially for the vehicle, but also the infrastructure that you need to have it installed in your home, these sorts of things.
Right. While you might be living in a condo that does not necessarily have the facility for charging infrastructure, you might be someone who owns a boat, who loves to tow that boat every weekend, and you might be living in rural Canada where there isn't the same level of infrastructure in place. And, as I mentioned earlier, you tend to go to your local auto shop to get your car serviced, and you realize now that as you purchase that new EV, it might not be possible to get it serviced locally. Now you have to drive longer distances to get service on the vehicle. So all these things impact consumer. In fact, recent surveys show that 3/4 of Canadians says, well, if I'm unable to get choices as to where I would get my car service, and the only place I could go is a dealership, I might not want to buy that type of vehicle. So those are all the kind of things that Canadians are going to be considering when looking at buying an EV or just using a still buying a traditional internal combustion engine.
You mentioned the ability to service the vehicle as well, and that by the sounds of it, there may be a skills challenge there, skills shortage, as there are with so many other, especially skilled trades. Is that an issue as well, Mr. Champagne?
It's not so much about the upskilling, that it is much more about the access to the information. These EV vehicles are, again, pretty much computers on wheels. And with the introduction of this vehicle, increasingly automakers are making it very hard, if almost impossible, for consumers to choose where to go to get these car serviced.
So we have, California basically mirroring, as you say, Canada's own timeline, 2035 being this kind of magic, if not aspirational number, to have this EV mandate. How well positioned are we to compete globally in this space right now, here in Canada? Are we in a good place?
I think we have work to do. You've seen recent announcements by the Minister of Industry on some partnership with automakers. So we're really trying to attract the manufacturing of EVs. There's been some good announcements made by automakers. So I think we're in an okay position. We remain a small market. We're part, obviously, the North American bloc where obviously labor is much more is cheaper in Mexico, and where we see a lot of development of manufacturing plan. So I think we're okay. We also have not the density of population, backing into a conversation about rural Canada, long distances, range anxiety. So there are factors that makes it so we might not be necessarily as attractive as like the Mexican market for new productions. But, the recent announcements we've seen are encouraging.
thank you so much for the information today. It's really interesting to see what happens with this industry. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Yeah, that's Jeff Champagne with the Auto Industries Association, Canadian Auto Industries Association. This is the Rob Snow Show. When we come back, we're going to talk about the housing market and the forecast for prices given the higher interest rates for the housing market across the country with an economist from the TD Bank. This is the Rob Snow Show on City News.
It really is a tremendous source of excitement and joy for the theatre staff and I to welcome artists finally back to the theatres. It was a tremendous pleasure to sit on the selection committee. We really have something to cater to all musical tastes, from trippy art pop to straight ahead rock and roll to soul and funk. But it's huge for us to be able to welcome local artists back into the theatres to showcase their amazing talents for people here.
Up to the top is where I'm headed and I'm going.
You know what? I've checked out some of the stuff already before doing this. I've been hyped and ready to do this because it's definitely being done on a major level. And, you know, I'm here seeing it in person right now and I'm like, wow, you know, this is what it is, man. I'm happy to be here.
This kind of concert series promotes music and gives us newcomers or even like new bands a big chance to showcase their talents and share their music with the world.
It's amazing that OMIC has organized this and given an opportunity for artists to perform, but also be part of something that I wouldn't be able to create this just on my own. So everybody's talents comes together to create something great.
It says a lot about the city that they are engaging the processes that get those musicians out and get them in front of people, and the music is getting heard. So we don't have a thing where like everybody's the best kept secret, right? We're sort of breaking through that wall a lot, and which is exactly what we need.
Well, first of all, I'm really grateful for this opportunity. For me, it's a little bit like being officially part of the local artist community in Ottawa. And it's like my first real big show where I'm gonna be performing my own songs, so it's really exciting.
What the hell's going on? Why you still holding on?
You know, it's a great opportunity for us artists to be able to really get a reach to an audience and a good quality audience too. I'm just happy that I can be involved. I'm happy that I can add value. It's top tier for sure.
It really is like a dream come true, especially having so many restrictions in the last couple of years, not being able to jam because we couldn't get together, and then to be able to do it in a beautiful venue like this with the seats in the background and just the whole entourage of it, and really feeling like we're able to put on a real show for the first time in a long time. It's just fantastic. It really is great.
The Rob Snow Show returns
on Rogers TV and City News,
101.1 FM
and 1310 AM.
Just looking at financial markets right now, we have red across the board right now. TSX down about 260 points. All the American indices are down as well, about 1% or so. That would be about a 268-point loss for the Dow right now. Canadian dollar is down. Oil, which had been on a bit of a run, is down today by more than 5%, so back to $91 a barrel. And Noah, I hate to break it to you, but your Bitcoins are falling today. Okay, you're going to have to hold off on that retirement plan. The 19,500 for the Bitcoins today. Let's talk real estate. Everybody is always interested in what's happening with real estate, especially in this interest rate environment. And the chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve said on Friday that interest rates will be higher for longer in order to beat down inflation. So the economists at the Toronto Dominion Bank, TD Economics, are out with a new Canadian housing outlook. And Rishi Sondhi is an economist with TD Economics. Joins me this morning on City News. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, it's great to have you on our show. So it's well known that the Canadian housing markets have been softening because interest rates are rising. How much has the market corrected so far?
Sure. Well, Canadian home sales declined by about 20% on a quarter-on-quarter basis in Q2, while national average home prices dropped by about 9%. When you're looking at sort of month-to-month peak-to-trough declines, in February, the market looks like the market hit sort of a near-term peak. So from February to July, prices are down by about 17% across Canada. So it's a pretty severe sort of downturn that we've seen so far.
Okay. So we talk about the real estate market, but some economists believe that there's really not a Canadian real estate market, that there's a Toronto market, a Vancouver market. Here in Ottawa, we have a market. St. John, that what's happens in Toronto may be different than Moncton, for example. So,
sure.
We've read for years about the red hot housing situation in places like Toronto and Vancouver. So has the downturn been more severe there than, say, a market like Ottawa, for example?
Yeah, so that's definitely the case. It's kind of interesting, right? Toronto is definitely, a market that's really suffering a lot, or really buckling a lot, I would say. But markets outside of Toronto, some of the smaller markets outside of Toronto in Ontario have actually seen bigger price drops because they saw bigger price run-ups during the course of the pandemic. Vancouver's a bit of an outlier in that, price declines have been more pronounced much more pronounced, I should say, in markets outside of Vancouver within BC than Vancouver itself. So that said, prices are still retrenching there, and they're retrenching overall in BC and Ontario more so than other parts of the country. Now in Ottawa, prices are down about 7% from their peak, which lags, the decline that we've seen in Ontario. So Ottawa's market thus far is holding up a little bit better than Ontario overall, at least from a price perspective.
Okay. And your report suggests the prairies and Atlantic Canada, you have prices holding up much better as well. So there we go. So again, home sales down 20% on a quarter-on-quarter basis. National average home prices down by about 9%, down 7% here in the Ottawa area.
Right.
So we've heard from Jerome Powell, the chair of the U.S. Fed. We're willing to do whatever it takes, basically, to fight inflation, and maybe interest rates will continue to go up.
Right.
The Bank of Canada has had a very hawkish stance. They've done these jumbo rate hikes. One was a full percentage point, right? So
sure.
How long is this going to last, this tightening cycle?
Yeah, I mean, our current forecast anticipates that they're going to take their policy rate to about 3.25% at the end of this year. We acknowledge that there's probably some upside risk to that call, just given how aggressive, both central banks have been. But, if we're right on our call, that would mean another sort of additional 75 basis points of tightening, although, again, there's some upside risk to that. They could go to, 350 or 375. We'll have to see how it goes. So even if they kind of go higher than what our current baseline is, which we may be updating, in the near future, we'll have to see. We still think that they'll end the year at this higher terminal rate, and they'll hold their policy rate at that level through 2023. So that's a little bit different than what markets, had been anticipating. They're anticipating, some potential for cuts. I think that potential has been pared back after Fed Powell's Jackson Hole speech. So we're certainly not looking for cuts by central banks next year, simply because in our view, inflation is going to remain, elevated. So it wouldn't make sense for the BOC to be cutting, or the Fed to be cutting in an environment where inflation is not really at their target as yet.
Okay. So there's still a lot of demand in the economy. That's why the central banks want to raise interest rates to cool things off.
Mm-hmm.
The savings rate is still high. The unemployment rate is at a record low. Mm-hmm. And immigration levels are at records, and they need places to live. 450,000 immigrants are coming to the country every year. Mm-hmm. So you would think that sounds like it should be a good news story for housing. What is the demand side of this right now?
Yeah, I mean, that is all these things that you're saying are true. I mean, one point of clarification just on the immigration.
Okay.
I think the federal government targets, sort of account for people that are switching from non-permanent to permanent resident status. So that's not necessarily net new people entering the country.
Okay.
People switching their status. That's in a typical year. That's about 25% of the that figure there. So that's but still, I mean, even with that, you're still talking about record immigration. So that's definitely sort of a valid point. Now, the best way to think about it is sort of a short-term versus a longer-term phenomenon. So in the short-term, interest rates are ratcheted up quite markedly. The BOC, Bank of Canada has taken the policy rate from 0.25% in March to 2.5% as of July. So it's a huge hike. So you have these higher interest rates, and the market is quite simply adjusting to this high rate environment, right? So that's the short-term phenomenon, relatively short-term phenomenon that sort of has to play out. The market has to find its footing. But longer term, we're more bullish on the outlook for housing for the factors that you'd sort of mentioned. Chiefly that population growth we think will be healthy. The demographics of the country currently are demand supportive for ownership housing, meaning that the share of people aged between, say, 25 and 40 years old in Canada, which is when home ownership rates typically tend to rise, or ownership housing, demand for ownership housing typically tends to rise. That's increasing as well. So, more people and the distribution of the people in the country are both favorable for ownership housing demand, and so we think that that's sort of a longer term, underpinning factor for both demand and prices.
Okay, and very quickly here, in a minute or less, sales off, prices down. But less than 10%. What does that mean for overall economic strength or weakness?
Okay. Well, yeah, there's definitely going to be some spillover into the broader economy. You estimate that the housing downturn is shave about a percent to 1.5% from overall economic growth. So we do think, of course, housing is having an impact. That said, our current baseline view is that the downturn in housing isn't enough to cause a recession in sort of the overall economy, but it's certainly weighing on it and certainly preventing it from growing any faster.
Thank you so much for the time today. Greatly appreciated. Very informative.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rishi, Sondhi from TD Economics on the housing market. Sam LaPrade coming up next with the Sam LaPrade Show. Back tomorrow after the 9 o'clock news with the Rob Snow Show on City News.
The Rob Snow Show.
Weekdays at 9 on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Number 1 for local news in Ottawa and the Valley.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now